3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning to you. You all right? This is it, I think, isn't it? This is an important moment. Friday the 2nd of June, 2023. I'm glancing around my studio. Every screen has got Philip Schofield on it. That's the leading story on the BBC News this morning. Philip Schofield giving an interview to someone who used to be the bag carrier for Evgeny Lebedev, the owner of the Evening Standard. We learnt yesterday that Evgeny Lebedev's dad, Alexander Lebedev, the former KGB intelligence officer who Boris Johnson put in the House of Lords despite warnings from MI5, is sanctioned by Ukraine, but not sanctioned by the British Conservative government. And then you learn about the latest revelations involving Boris Johnson's private communications during the early days, the early months, the early year of the COVID crisis. And you learn that he hasn't handed over his phone at all. And you probably can't even remember why he has complicated telephone issues at that period in time. I'll remind you why. It turned out that his actual direct line was still on a think tank website from when he was some junior education minister, I think, giving a speech. They'd left his mobile phone on the press release, and the Pop Bitch website, a scurrilous and rather splendid scandal sheet published online and full of all sorts of juicy tidbits of gossip about public figures, Pop Bitch got hold of the story that the actual Prime Minister's actual mobile phone number had been publicly available for the duration of his premiership. So he had to change his phone. Do you remember why that turned out to be convenient? No, I'll tell you. It turned out to be convenient because when it emerged that a Tory donor had been essentially bankrolling his interior decoration, he was able to claim that he'd completely forgotten about his communications with said Tory donor and didn't even understand that the Tory donor was doing the bankrolling because he hadn't got his phone anymore. He'd had to get a new one after it emerged that his actual direct line mobile had been in the public domain for the last 10 years. It's the same excuse now. You'll remember a bloke called Bethel, Lord Bethel. Lord Bethel is a baron who I think went to Harrow, and every time the A-level results come out, he likes to tweet about how, despite getting bad A-level results, he managed to succeed in life by hustling and ducking and diving. The 6th Baron Bethel, ducking and diving, not needing good A-level results. He lost his phone as well. Do you remember? He lost it, and then it got broken, and then it got lost again, and then it was found, and then it was broke. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Did it or did it not contain evidence of ludicrous cronyism and collusion in the pursuit of massive PPE contracts? I don't know anymore whether we will ever know. What do you think is on Johnson's phone? Been asking you all week. I think I might know. I think it's going to be full of newspaper editors begging him not to lock down the country, because their owners have so much exposure in commercial investment. I think it's going to be full of newspaper editors turning screws and trying to put influence on him. I think it's going to be full of who the hell knows what else is likely to be there. Donors trying to get a little bit of the action. I don't know. And nor, of course, do you. And if the government get their way, nor will you ever. Because what happened yesterday is actually incredible. What happened yesterday is that the woman appointed to chair the COVID inquiry received notice that she is being taken to court by the government, albeit with a different Prime Minister, that appointed her to chair the COVID inquiry in order to resist her demands for access to facts, for access to evidence. That's the crucial word here. Who decides whether it's evidence or not? Not the bloody accused. The judge does. Rishi Sunak, who could be described as the accused in this case, alongside Boris Johnson and the rest of them, they are going to court in order to try to stop evidence being given to the judge leading the investigation, leading the inquiry into COVID. Just pause for a flipping minute and think about that. I shall rein in my inner Jonathan Pye in about 30 seconds' time. But this has really got me, this. Especially because it's bloody Philip Schofield. Everywhere. Being interviewed by a man on the BBC who used to carry bags for Evgeny Lebedev, whose dad is sanctioned in Ukraine, while Boris Johnson dances around the place claiming to still be the saviour. The mind boggles. truly boggles. Just have a think for a minute about what that means. Imagine, and some people listening to this programme, I am acutely conscious, will not need to imagine this. Imagine you'd lost someone and you're still not sure whether you needed to. You're still not sure whether an earlier lockdown or a Prime Minister bothering to turn up to Cobra meetings or a proper handle upon the facts and the crisis or having somebody other than Matt Flipping Hancock in the Department of Health. You still wonder whether if things had been dealt with slightly differently, your dad would still be alive. Just imagine that. And then they call the inquiry, right? You think, I don't trust this lot, James. I don't trust them as far as I could throw them, but they've appointed a solid judge. Baroness Hallett has a really good reputation, just like Sue Gray. I give them benefit of the doubt on this. They do seem to be genuine in their need, in their desire to see the truth. Baroness, yeah, all right. Well, the Tories have done it. They've called him. Jess Phillips on Question Time last night pointing out that other countries have already finished their inquiries. But hey-ho, we're British. We do things differently. So God, it's going to be... Wow. And then Rishi Sunak instructs lawyers to go to court to stop her getting evidence that she wants. How many different ways can you phrase those words? How can you rearrange that sentence? Rishi Sunak instructs lawyers to go to court to stop the head of the inquiry into the COVID handling from getting her hands on evidence that she wants. Why? Oh, it's all completely irrelevant. Well, show us then. Prove it. Give us an example, Sunak. What's irrelevant? Johnson pops up like an unflushable lump and says, I've handed over all my stuff and I urge the government to do the same. 6 hours later, we learn that he hasn't. 6 hours, even by Boris Johnson's standards, that the gap between lie and exposure is vanishingly small. What did I say to you yesterday? He says what's best for him in that nanosecond, not even in the context of 24 hours, but 24 seconds. What's the best thing for me? I'll tell the newspapers, they'll print it anyway. They'll treat it as fact that I have handed over everything and I urge the Cabinet Office to do the same. Fast forward 6 hours. No, you flipping haven't. You're still hanging on to one of your phones. The phones that covers the most relevant period of this investigation, of this inquiry. Here's a judge. Here is the judge. Here is the evidence. Here is the Conservative government stopping the dog from seeing the rabbit. And Philip Schofield's still on my telly. On a rolling news channel. I've started doing something lately. I don't know whether you've noticed, and it's going to backfire horribly one day. I've started to narrow at the very top of the hour the focus on who I want to talk to first. I was toying today with the idea of confining the conversation early doors to people who voted Tory in 2019, to people who voted for Boris Johnson. How the hell are you handling this? I don't mean Idiot's Corner. Idiot's Corner is, I can't believe you're bashing Boris Johnson again. No, nor can I. It's a miracle, isn't it? A man who has led the country to not even to the brink of disaster. Why on earth would you be talking about that? An investigation into how thousands of people died, whether or not it was necessary, being actually scuppered by the people who called the investigation. So it's Idiot's Corner for you. I mean normal people who haven't boiled their brains so completely or got so high on Brexit jingoism that they struggle to remember what day it is. You voted for this man. How the hell do you process the complete collapse in reputation or credibility? I don't know, but that wouldn't be the right. And then I thought, let's confine it to grieving families. Let's talk only to people who genuinely hope that this investigation might shed some light on what happened and why. And then, because I'm a bit mad sometimes, I thought, let's confine it to grieving Tories. Let's confine it only to people who lost someone in the crisis but voted for Boris Johnson, not knowing at the time that this is what would transpire, to be in charge during the biggest peacetime threat this country will hopefully ever face. And then I thought, forget it. Everyone can have a crack today. Everybody's working. This is just shocking. And there are mornings when I wonder why. I am not the only one by any stretch of the imagination, but there are mornings why I wonder why. It continues to elude huge swathes of the British media just how serious the situation that we find ourselves in is. And then I remember that it doesn't, because almost all of the newspaper editors and their little patsies in broadcast media, they're on Boris Johnson. They're not just on Boris Johnson's side, they are Boris Johnson's side. They're his cheerleaders. They spent how many years tickling his tummy and chuckling at his ludicrous jokes and going along with his lies and pretending it's all just a game. Oh, he's having technology lessons off Jennifer R. Curie. Oh, he's such a lad, isn't he? He's such a lad, yeah. Yeah, technology lessons. Mayor of London, public money, forget about it. Tens of millions of pounds on a bridge that was never built. A single brick was never laid. Lies about his mistresses, lies about his marriages, lies about his ambitions, his jobs, his performance. Lie. Oh, it's all just a bit of good old Boris, ruffle hair, mug to camera. It's all just a little bit of... They're all in on it. So how the hell can they turn around now and tell you the truth? The people you rely on for the information that you need to enter this country, to engage in the political discourse in this country with even a modicum of knowledge and understanding, they're still lying to you. They sold you this clown. And they torched the receipt. So don't turn to the Telegraph or the Sun or the Daily Mail in search of truth or accuracy or a proper reflection of the seriousness of this situation, because they are in on it. They're not just sitting on their hands or staying out of it. Anybody who's had the ability to interview Boris Johnson on any occasion, let alone several occasions, is completely complicit in this absolute corruption. Completely. How could anybody have got away with so much while being actually quite accessible to the media for so long? Answer, he only ever got interviewed by tummy ticklers. What the hell would I be talking about today on this programme if I'd spent the last 10 years tickling Boris Johnson's tummy? I've got absolutely no idea. Probably e-scooters. It's absolutely incredible that the people who thought the investigation, the inquiry might finally shed some light upon what actually happened are now being told by the same government that instigated the inquiry that we are going to court to keep evidence out of the hands of the judge. Think about that in the context of a criminal case. Here's the accused. All right, we want to have a look at your diaries. No. You can't have a look at my diary, but you're the accused. Yeah, but you can't have a look at my I mean, crikey. What about my privacy? If you want me to hand over my phone, if you're a victim of rape in this country, they take your phone. It's made available to the prosecution as well as the defence. So the prosecution can go through it looking for evidence that you were, quotes, asking for it, end quotes, which still happens in courtrooms in this country. In a criminal case, the accuser has no privacy. But in this case, Rishi Sunak thinks the defence should be able to decide what evidence the court gets to see. Just think about that for 30 seconds. You are the accused. And you are so arrogant, so entitled, so used to getting your own way, you honestly believe that you should decide what evidence the court gets to see. You, the accused, get to decide what evidence the court gets to see. Phone a couple of friendly newspaper editors and they'll be writing bilge about how it compromises your privacy. Sarah Vine in the Daily Mail writing bilge about how, one of my emails was once read out on Sky News. And it was all tatty-hilarious. It was so embarrassing. So I totally believe that Boris Johnson's messages should stay secret. OK, next time someone's on trial for a disgusting crime, you tell me whether they should decide what evidence gets put before the court or whether the flipping court should. It's not normal, this. It's not normal. These are not serious people, and their stranglehold upon the flow of information from politics to population is now so complete that Philip Schofield is still on my television. Right now. Right, still there. 10:17. Laura Kuenssberg will probably pop up on the telly on Sunday morning. Oh, that's quite a charge. What's happened? Who asks questions anymore? Who bothers about the truth? I suppose we should reflect the fact that this is a phone-in programme at some point this morning, which usually involves me asking you a question. Do I need to? Let's find out. 0345 6060 973. What do you want to say about this? Go on, fill your boots. Because no one else is going to let you. 0345 6060 973. Okay? Here's the question. What do you think about the government that called the inquiry going to court in the hope of stopping the inquiry, getting the evidence that it wants to see? God, defend that for me if you can. Seriously. Here's an inquiry, here's an investigation into the worst thing that's happened to this country in peacetime. And here's the government trying to stop the judge leading the inquiry, getting the evidence that she wants to see. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 10:18. It is 21 minutes after 10, and it is a truly remarkable moment. It's as if nobody died, isn't it? It's as if we didn't have our lives turned upside down for the best part of 3 years. It's as if businesses didn't shut. It's as if livelihoods weren't completely destroyed. It's as if nothing happened. Oh, there's an inquiry into it. Oh, well, don't let them see the evidence. What do you make of it? 0345 6060 973. What do you make of the decision by the Tory government yesterday to go to court to stop the inquiry they called into the COVID handling, getting the evidence that they want to get? I don't know that you can do anything except what I've done this morning. Just sit here and splutter. I genuinely don't know if there's anything intelligent, helpful, substantive, constructive to say. It is so beyond the normal experience, so beyond the normal rules, the notion that they are actually going to court to stop the judge seeing evidence. I mean, come on, have a crack at that. Just have a crack at defending that. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, have a crack, seriously. Absolutely breathtaking. Jack's in Tunbridge Wells. Jack, your turn.
Hiya, James.
Hello.
Look, I think this is another example of one rule for us, one rule for the Conservative government. We as Joe Public, if we were requested to give this information, would be obliged to give it.
Well, we wouldn't be able to afford the lawyers to go to court to not give it. I mean, it's a bit like libel. You'd need to have £300,000 set aside just simply to be able to consider it.
Absolutely. But it's sort of more Tory sleaze and scandal. Richie Sunak got caught without a seatbelt on, but because he's the Prime Minister, one rule for him, one rule for us.
I don't know that I'd bring that into it necessarily. Just the thing that's missing for me, right, is where whether you want to call it rage or confusion or disgust or whatever it is, what is the counterbalance? What on earth? I've been trying all week, actually. What on earth is on the other side of the scales? Because with respect, Jack, I mean, one rule for us, one rule for them. All of that I get. But how would they defend it if they were here now? If they had the basic decency to come forward and tell the families, the grieving COVID families, why they're trying to keep evidence out of the hands of the inquiry, how would they justify it? How would they describe it?
Well, it's unjustifiable in many respects. I mean, if you were to take this purely at a human level, I don't think you could sit in front of those families and say that.
Nor do I, but I sit here so naively sometimes thinking, but there must be an argument. That's why I was thinking this morning, maybe we'll confine it. Yesterday I tried to do it. Give me a ring if you honestly can make a cogent case for not sharing this detail, for not publishing it, just giving it to the judge. We won't see a lot of it ever unless she thinks it's relevant. What would they actually say? What would they say? Why can't we see it? Why won't you give it to... Oh, it's completely irrelevant. Let the judge decide.
Absolutely. It's difficult because it's essentially the public servant. It's a public office. It should be information that is, unless there's some sort of security risk.
Well, then tell us. Well, security risk, like putting someone in the House of Lords that MI5 have warned against and whose dad has now been sanctioned by Ukraine. That kind of security risk. Hanging out with Boris Johnson 4 days, was it the night of the election? He went round for dinner. He went round to a party. That kind of security risk. 25 minutes after 10. This is a day for me. Friday the 2nd of June. It might be because I'm in the middle of writing my book about the collation of all this evidence and how so much of it is in plain sight and it gets completely ignored. But my goodness me. Go on, please, have a crack at defending this. 0345 6060 973 or explaining it. Sheila's in Stoke Newington. Sheila, what is going on?
So go with me for a moment on this, James, and pull out the Conservative playbook and think like a Conservative. What worked for them in the past?
Refugees. Can I stop now?
Yeah, refugees, okay. But also lefty lawyers.
Okay.
So I think this is a no-lose situation in that they're sort of setting up the possibility that if they lose this case, they can then go on to smearing Baroness Hallett as another lefty lawyer that's out to get them.
Like they did with Sue Gray who isn't a lawyer,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
she's a lefty civil
The sort of
servant
thing
or
you've
part
been
of the
talking
blob
about on your show.
or whatever you want to call it. So the plan, they go to court, they know they'll lose. When they lose, it's victimhood again. It's the witch hunt narrative. It's good God, I think you might be onto something, Sheila.
Yeah. That's my thought. I love your show.
You're
Have
very
a good
kind.
day.
No, thank you very much. It's a sparkling insight. Well, I mean, go on, give me a better explanation of what's going on. They go to court, they know they'll lose. Dominic Grieve on with Nick this morning explaining as a former Attorney General why he doesn't think they've got a leg to stand on, and then they can set up the narrative with the help of the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail, whose editors were almost certainly sliding in to Boris Johnson's WhatsApp during the period that they're trying to keep secret, claiming that it's some sort of witch hunt. What's the other phrase they used over the partying, the endless partying, the puking, and the partying in Downing Street while the rest of us weren't even allowed to visit our mums? What was the other? It's not just witch hunt. There's another phrase they use as well. I can't see it today. It's weird. And normally I can see what they're up to. Maybe Sheila's nailed it. You tell me. Why is Rishi Sunak going to court to stop the inquiry called by his own government into the handling of the COVID crisis from getting its hands on evidence that they want to get their hands on? You come up with a better answer to that than the one that Sheila has formulated. 0345 6060 973. Daily Telegraph columnists are concerning themselves with today. Remember, the Daily Telegraph is to Boris Johnson as the Beano is to Dennis the Menace. One of their most prominent columnists today has gone in hard on, I'm giving up on Waitrose. I'm giving up on Waitrose, writes Alison Pearson. The middle class won't put up with a supermarket that cares more about values than stocking its shelves. I can't bring myself to read it. I focus entirely on the headline. So today is a day on which we discover that a Tory Prime Minister is going to court to stop an inquiry called by a Tory Prime Minister into what happened during the worst peacetime catastrophe this country has ever endured, and a prominent cheerleader for Boris Johnson is writing about giving up on Waitrose. Mark's in Shoreham. Mark, I don't know whether I'm losing the will to live or whether I'm feeling a whole new gear of righteous indignation. I might have to wait till I get off air later to find out. What did you want to say?
James, I'm in the same boat as you. I'm immunocompromised, and today is a year that I've been running with a couple of other people a campaign just trying to get a drug for all the immunocompromised people that have been stuck shielding for so long.
And still are, in many cases.
And still are, exactly. And just totally and absolutely ignored by this government. Every letter we have sent in partnership with national charities has been ignored, just totally and utterly disregarded by this government. And the stories we hear from the people that are still affected by this are heartbreaking and sickening. And this week, we've been writing our statement to submit at the request of Baroness Hallett to the inquiry. I've just finished writing a 54-page statement that outlines everything that people in this position since they started shielding have gone through. No support, no financial support.
How did it happen, is what you want to know. How did it happen, and what are you going to do about it? And they're trying to keep the evidence secret.
Yeah, and when you sit and look at some of these questions that have been released, that have been asked of Boris Johnson,
that's a good point.
Beyond the pale. Yeah. It's just sickening to see how it's been treated. So your question as to why they're trying to hide it, it's right in front of your eyes. You only have to look back about a year ago when the Tory party had that dinner and they all walked in smirking past the various families that were campaigning as they walked in with absolutely no regard for them.
Is it that simple? We're talking about sociopathy on a sort of grand scale. It is literally, what is our job here? Our job is to avoid getting into trouble. That is our only job. We called an investigation because we had to. It's a bit like Leveson. I was writing about Leveson at the weekend. The only reason why Cameron called Leveson was because of the revelations about the News of the World hacking Millie Dowler's family's phone. If it hadn't been for that, the story wouldn't have gone where it went, and Cameron wouldn't have reacted. So they called Leveson because they felt that they had to. And then, fast forward 7 years and they cancelled Leveson too. So they've only called this inquiry because they felt that they had to. And they have no intention whatsoever of helping it reach full and frank conclusions. It's like Hillsborough all over again. Our job is to keep ourselves out of trouble, and that's why we're going to court. However ridiculous and disgusting it looks, we're going to go to court to try and keep the evidence in a safe.
Exactly.
Locked in a safe.
This is what they do with every issue. Let's keep pushing it away and push it away until the next complete screw-up comes along, and then the media attention will be pushed to that. And we can forget about this
one.
one.
I don't even think we can talk about media attention because the media are in on this.
Exactly.
You know, Philip Schofield is still on my television.
Yep.
And that's the BBC. That's the, you know, supposedly the broadcaster of repute and impartiality. It's still there. I want wall-to-wall coverage of why the hell Rishi Sunak is going to court to keep evidence away from the inquiry into COVID. And all I'm getting is wall-to-wall Philip flipping Schofield. 10:31 is the time, Thomas. I wish you well, Mark. It's a horrible position to be in. Probably the most forgotten cohort throughout the whole of this crisis. And, of course, your misery continues. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 10:36 is the time. I told you this story was moving fast. Boris Johnson has just set fire to Rishi Sunak's Downing Street, metaphorically speaking, writing in the last few minutes to Baroness Hallett, Heather Hallett, saying, you can have all my WhatsApps, even the ones on the phone that I haven't handed over, despite claiming earlier this week that I had handed it. So again, just pause for a minute and think about how Boris Johnson operates. Okay, the story's changed, chaps. Let's completely forget that I put it to my client journalist earlier this week that I had already handed everything over. It has now emerged that I hadn't. They've found out about the phone. What is best for me in this moment, in this nanosecond? What is best for me and me alone? Never mind the country, never mind the party, never mind the Prime Minister, never mind colleagues past and present. What is best for me? Right, I'm going to write to Heather Hallett and tell her she can have the blooming lot. That's what I'm going to do, because that makes me look good in this nanosecond, even if it ends up, if the contents of the messages end up painting me as some sort of latter-day Caligula or a Nero who fiddled while Britain burned. Right now, in this news cycle, in this moment, the best thing I can do is hand everything over. So here's the letter. You have quite properly decided to leave no stone unturned. All right, shade, straight away. Straight away, shade at Downing Street, to leave no stone unturned in your search for the truth about government decision-making during the pandemic. There's a subtext to this, which he doesn't think you will know about, but you will, because I will tell you, which is that we've seen some of the questions that Baroness Hallett has already sent to him. This letter is written on the presumption that you will not know about them. As I wrote to the inquiry yesterday, I see no reason why the inquiry should not be able to satisfy itself about the contents of my own WhatsApps and notebooks and to check the relevant WhatsApp conversations, about 40 of them, do me a favour, for anything it deems relevant to the COVID inquiry. Then comment about the legal action. It was not my decision to do so. And he adds, I'm not willing to let my material become a test case for others when I am perfectly content for the inquiry to see it. See what I mean about setting fire to Downing Street? And then we come to the new phone. I would like to do the same with any material that may be on an old phone, which I have been previously told I can no longer access safely. In view of the urgency of your request, I believe we need to test this advice, which came from the security services. This is the phone he was reportedly told not to turn on again because it emerged that the number had been in the public domain for the entire duration of his premiership. Oh, and the security services who gave him the advice are the same security services who told him not to put Evgeny Lebedev in the House of Lords, reportedly. That would be the same Evgeny Lebedev who used to employ the bloke who's interviewing Philip Schofield all over the BBC today while not talking about this. Oh, and that's the same Evgeny Lebedev whose dad, it was reported by Tortoise yesterday, has actually been sanctioned by Ukraine since the end of last year, but not currently sanctioned by the UK. I have asked the Cabinet Office for assistance in turning it on securely so that I can search it for all relevant material. I propose to pass all such material directly to you. So, as I said to you yesterday, you can't believe a word he says, because yesterday he said it had already all been handed over, and now he's written a letter saying, well, actually, no, I'd like to hand it all over, even though I've previously claimed that it had all been handed over. But the story moves again. And here are the questions that Baroness Hallett wrote to Boris Johnson on February the 3rd. Just a little selection of 150 questions that Baroness Hallett sent to him. For example, in relation to the response to COVID-19, did you have any concerns regarding the performance of any cabinet minister between January 2022 and February 2022? Oh, that's completely irrelevant. That's privacy. If you can't send a message slagging off a colleague, then honestly, whatever next, the Spanish Inquisition, of course it's relevant. I don't think some of these, they're not even on the payroll, these client journalists. They don't get money out of it. They just get invitations to lunches and dinners at Downing Street. And obviously the opportunity to tickle the tummy of Boris Johnson in the studio. Oh, you can't send messages. Oh, no, if you can't slag off a car. Oh, no, they'll have said, oh, no. So, obviously, we know where Baroness Hallett is going with that. Did you receive advice from the then Cabinet Secretary that Matt Hancock should be removed from his position? No mention of that in the letter today. To what extent did you believe that coronavirus was akin to influenza? How crucial is that question? Did you hold and express the initial view in early 2020 that COVID-19 was not a serious threat and was akin to swine flu? Quite like to see answers to that question. Why did you not attend any COBRA meetings in relation to COVID-19 prior to the 2nd of March 2020? Well, I was busy writing my Shakespeare biography, he is unlikely to admit. Were you advised or requested to attend any of the previous meetings on the 24th of January, the 29th of January, the 4th of February, the 12th of February and the 18th of February? No mention of that in his letter to the inquiry. Why did you attend a personal social meeting on the evening of 19th of March after you had called on the UK on the 16th of March to stop all non-essential contact with others? Oh, it's completely irrelevant. So what if he had a party and a slice of cake with friends? It's a witch hunt, I tell you, a witch hunt. No mention of that question in his letter to the inquiry. Why did the UK government not advise the public in February or March 2020 to wear face coverings on a precautionary basis? Did you inform the then Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte during a phone call on or around the 13th of March 2020 that you wanted herd immunity? Or words to that effect? And please confirm whether in March 2020 or around that period you suggested to senior civil servants and advisors that you be injected with COVID-19 on television to demonstrate to the public that it did not pose a threat. Johnson's made £5 million since he left Downing Street. He's bought a £4 million house in the country with a moat. He's home and dry. He's over the line. Doesn't matter what comes out now. He's set up for life. He'll be entertaining in the very back of his mind the vague possibility of some sort of return to politics, but otherwise he's going to spend the rest of his life pretending he's a statesman with a record to be proud of. And the kind of people that donate huge sums of money to the Conservative Party and mysteriously end up with incredibly lucrative PPE contracts will treat him like that. Bamford, who owns JCB, lets him live in his garden. Other rich people have peacocks running around their garden. Anthony Bamford, big Brexiter, big Tory donor, host of Boris Johnson's wedding, deliverer of food to Downing Street during COVID from his wife's delicatessen. He doesn't have peacocks running around his garden. All the other rich people in the Cotswolds are spitting nails. He's got a bloody Prime Minister living in a shed in his garden. We've only got peacocks, darling. It's ridiculous. And they will treat him like a statesman. They'll treat him like somebody who is anything other than the mother of all national arsonists. Please confirm whether in March 2020 you suggested to senior civil servants and advisors that you be injected with COVID-19 on television to demonstrate to the public that it did not pose a threat. Oh, it's all such fun, isn't it? It's all such wizard japes. And here we are. So Johnson, inevitably, doing whatever he thinks in the shortest of terms is best for him, and the focus comes back to Rishi Sunak. Why does Rishi Sunak want to keep evidence away from the inquiry? Answer, because everybody in the cabinet is still ambitious. Rishi Sunak wants to win an election. He at least wants to fight one. Jeremy Hunt's not going away. Loads of them are fleeing the sinking ship, but not the ones who think they've got a realistic chance of preferment or advancement. So Johnson's absence of political ambition in this moment explains his behaviour in exactly the same way as his absolute excess of political ambition explains so many of his other previous decisions, like backing a Brexit he knew would be ridiculous. There it is. I mean, that is what is happening now. You've got the politicians left in power, desperate to cling to power, trying to keep the evidence away from the inquiry, and a politician who's already done at least a dozen things that would have ended any other politician's career before finally he fell on the sword of Chris Pincher's delinquency, sexual delinquency. You got him making a calculation based entirely on personal reputation and advancement. So, yeah, I still haven't forgiven Sunak for stabbing me in the back. So I'm going to stab him in the front. Even though I'm going to come out of it looking even worse than they do, they're going to look bad enough for their careers to be scuppered. Presuming, of course, that the right-wing media get their fingers out of their backside and actually start covering this stuff. Oh, 10:48 is the time. Is it really? I feel like I've just drawn breath this morning. Talking about the absolute skip fire that the government has become on this occasion, in large part because Boris Johnson has been pouring petrol on the flames. In this case, essentially running rings around the Cabinet Office by contacting Baroness Hallett directly and saying, you can have all of my stuff. And no one, of course, is going to be able to point out that he said yesterday he'd already given her all of this stuff because they're too busy talking about Philip Schofield. Phew, well, we're not. Lewis is in Putney. Lewis, what would you like to say?
Well, I'll try and carry on from where you left off. So my main point would be I think it would give context to all the decisions they made at the start. And obviously the main defence they've always put forward was we got all the big calls right.
I haven't heard that phrase for a while, but my goodness me, Nadine Dorries, I think, had it tattooed across her forehead, didn't she?
Well, exactly. And so I think that, they'll say that we got all the big calls right.
It was always he got all the big calls right, not we. He got all the big calls right.
True, but he's the head of the government. They're the cabinet. They'll all be involved. They'll all be.
Of course. Well, they all said it. They all said he got all the big calls right, and this will prove that they knew that he didn't.
Well, I think it will give context that that basically they got it all wrong. They locked down off the top of my head, they locked down too late to begin with. They let all those sports and events go forward. They opened up the schools. They didn't do the firebreak lockdown. They didn't lock down. Weren't going to lock down at Christmas. Then did lock down at Christmas. Herd immunity. There'll be a whole load of chat about that. Eat out to help out when allegedly Sunak brought in all those deniers to say that how we should do all that. Which would probably look very bad for Sunak.
So I mean, I don't think you need to say allegedly. He looked around for people to give him the advice that he wanted to receive. It's what they all do. It's why right-wing think tanks anonymously funded exist in the first place. Not that I don't know they were relevant in this case, but find me someone who will give me the advice that I want. Went out the message.
And when you actually think about it, I off the top of my head again, I can only think of one decision they actually got right, and
go on.
That was the vaccine. They said it should be 3 weeks apart. They said we should do it 12 weeks apart, so more people should get the first dose.
Yes, that was the right call.
The only thing I can think of.
But they even lied about having to be outside of the European Union in order to do the vaccine rollout. Of course, that was an almighty lie that the same people who said he got all the calls right continued to tell for a long time. It's going to be epic, isn't it? If it ever sees the light of day, this stuff.
Yeah, I think so, because, it's probably a multitude of things, as everything always is. But it would probably, like I said, one, it would just prove incompetency, probably at the worst.
At the
how
best.
You describe it, maybe.
No, incompetence at best, and downright obvious moral, if not commercial, corruption at worst. Well, so I know that I've probably already closed this line of inquiry down with the observation about him doing whatever he thinks is best for him in that very specific nanosecond. But Johnson's intervention today, 24 hours after telling us that everything had been given to Baroness Hallett, Johnson has now promised to give everything to Baroness Hallett. What's he playing at?
This is what I was thinking when you were talking. It's like at school. Like, there's always that kid who everyone will protect, and because he's the popular one. But as soon as he's in trouble, he'll shop everyone in immediately. And I don't know why they command such loyalty, because I guess they show it to the people when they're in trouble. I mean, so let's say Priti Patel, when she's in trouble, he'll show the loyalty in protecting her. But as soon as he's in trouble, he's bringing everyone else down. I don't know why. It just reminded me of when he was talking about the deep state, when he was going down. And he was just being an arsonist. He was just burning everything down behind him, like he is now.
It is still. You can put it. You can put it into words. You can put narcissism into words. You can give it almost. I don't think we should, but you can give it a psychological diagnosis. But unless you can feel it, it's almost impossible to grasp what it would be like to have no conscience, isn't it? Because unless you've got no conscience, it's one of the few things. However much empathy you've got, you can't quite imagine having none.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
and he would be sitting there now, utterly. He won't even be thinking of it in malevolent terms. He won't even be thinking of it it will simply be what's best for me, and also the joy of vengeance as well. You can't. I don't think you can begin to grasp it unless you are similarly bent is the kindest word I can think of. Lewis, thank you. Lee's in Frankfurt. Lee, what's going on?
Yeah, hey James. Thanks for the entertainment this morning, asking all the right questions as usual.
I'm getting the answers.
We're an ex-UK, we're aliens. We moved to the EU after Brexit and Boris and everything else in 2018. We opened the most expensive bottle of Chardonnay we could find last night, in celebration.
Because you think that the castle is crumbling?
It is totally crumbling, mate. I mean, this is going to burn Sunak down.
You're more optimistic than I am. I feel we've been here before. I've run out of expensive Chardonnay.
Yeah, but mate, this is 14 days. She's got Section 21 powers.
Yeah.
There's no way out of this now.
Johnson's rolled over. Johnson knows the gig is up. So, unfortunately, the flames confined to Downing Street.
Yeah, he realises, right? He's going to burn it down behind him. He'll get paid by neocon think tanks for the rest of his life and books and everything else. He doesn't care. He knows he's not coming back. The problem is, for Sunak, is now he knows that, he's got nowhere to hide. I mean, we're celebrating. It's the best thing that's happened to the UK in 5 years.
Crikey.
I
I wish I could feel a little bit more of your glee. I really do. I'm probably just a bit too neck deep in it at the moment. I also have so many disappointments, Lee. So many times you thought, well, surely this. And actually, even if I joined you in sipping a small glass, then the fact that Johnson, under this analysis, waltzes away is a reason for pouring it back in the bottle, isn't it?
But Boris is Boris, right? Everyone saw it 4 years ago. Whatever. Right? Yeah, Johnson's Johnson, whatever it is. This is about Sunak and the cabinet, right? And frankly, it's about a better route forward for the UK. The UK we left behind very sadly, right? It's the first step on a road to improvement and back to the normal path.
Yeah, all right.
Right?
So to make the appreciation of the extent of the denigration, to make it unignorable, to have it front and centre, to have the evidence of messages being ignored, of stupid ideas, of weaponised ignorance, dangerous, to have it all out there just reduces the rump, the Nadine Dorries rump. I apologise for that image, but it reduces the rump of he got all the big calls right to such a ludicrous and tiny constituency that the rest of us can get on with the business of undoing the damage they've done, up to and including Brexit.
And you've got to remember, mate, this is everything from who did the 800k loan, right? Who is that individual, right? All the way through to Moan, PPE.
Well, they were at Chequers, reportedly, the bloke who provided the loan or guaranteed the loan and the bloke who facilitated the loan and ended up chairman of the BBC are among the people that may have been in breach of lockdown regulations during a visit to Chequers, and that will come out as well. But, I mean, you can say one thing about Boris Johnson with absolute certainty. He doesn't care who gets hurt. It's odd that people perceive him as loyal, but they're loyal. So narcissists, for example, can love their dogs. And the reason for that is that the dog is perceived as an extension of the narcissist. John Ronson writes brilliantly about this. Is it the sociopath test or the psychopath test? He writes brilliantly about this. And so you sit there and think, oh, well, hang on a minute. If he's so awful, why was he loyal to Priti Patel? Why did he look after Priti? And the answer is really simple. It's the same way that a psychopath loves their Rottweiler. So Johnson protects Priti Patel because to fire her for bullying makes him look bad for putting her in post in the first place. Why didn't he get rid of Matt Hancock? Because if he got rid of Matt Hancock, as people were apparently urging him to do, not least after the Cheltenham races debacle, if he gets rid of Matt Hancock, it makes him look, it affects his self-image. You have to think constantly about self-image. It affects his ability to look at himself and see a cross between Winston Churchill and Alexander the Great. So Winston Churchill and Alexander the Great would not have put Priti Patel in the Home Office or Matt Hancock in the Health Department. But he did. So he can't admit that it was a mistake by then removing them after they've been found to be, in Priti Patel's case, a disgusting bully and in Matt Hancock's case, a blithering idiot. That's narcissism. That's not loyalty. That's protection of self-regard, protection of self-image. And it's at the heart of all of this. It's coming up to 10:59. I'm minded to continue. I just glance at my screen and Philip Schofield's still there, so I feel a sense of national duty to continue this conversation about a story that is of, truly unprecedented nature. A Prime Minister from the Conservative Party is going to court to prevent an inquiry called by a Prime Minister from the Conservative Party getting its hands on evidence that they have been charged with investigating. It is as if the accused in a criminal courtroom stood up and said, I will decide what evidence you can and cannot see, and I will decide what is relevant to your inquiry, and I will decide what is relevant to this case. I, the accused, in this case Rishi Sunak, will decide what is and is not relevant, which is objectively remarkable. I can tell how remarkable it is by the silence coming from Idiot's Corner today. Nobody's trying to defend this. Nobody can even pretend, apart from an early accusation of Boris bashing, which is about as close to a definition of imbecility as you're ever going to find outside a dictionary. Nobody can defend this, which means they'll do what they always do when we reach the point of indefensibility. They'll look away and talk about something else. Oh, look, it's Philip Schofield. It is 3 minutes after 11 and Philip Schofield's still on Sky News, but the BBC, thankfully, has actually started reporting one of the most remarkable and important stories of their lifetime. I mean, in the context of COVID, that description is probably inadequate, but in the context of finding out what the government was actually doing in the early days of the crisis, I think the description still fits. Here's a worry. Do you know, bizarrely, talk about great minds, I started thinking this during the news bulletin. James, he sees this as his way back. He's getting on the front foot. The evidence will not be heard until after the next general election. The Tories will probably be out of office. The possibility of them being genuinely held to account will have gone with it. In the meantime, Sunak's credibility diminishes daily, his popularity plummets, and Johnson supporters have an example of their great leader looking honest and honourable. As the election creeps up and the next election, the one after the next one, and Tory MPs start seeing the writing on the wall ever clearer, you mean the next election? They flock to Johnson for damage limitation as they can scrape back some lunatic Brexit-bashing votes. Never, ever dismiss that possibility of overarching ambition. That's the bit I was trying to convey when I was talking to Lewis in Putney about the impossibility of being able to fully inhabit that kind of personality, because it involves having no conscience whatsoever, and those of us that have a conscience, however flawed we may be, we can't ever fully grasp what it would be like to have none at all, to be utterly devoid of conscience, concern or care for anybody except yourself. And that takes us right back to that infamous report by his housemaster at Eton, doesn't it? So it's not impossible. It's about ego, isn't it, rather than material benefit or material wealth. So could he be seeing? Because listen, I can do anything I want and get away with it. Is Johnson's credo. It's Johnson's personality. Look, I can do anything I want. I can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. Therefore, even if I emerge from the COVID inquiry looking worse than everybody else, I'm unique. I am Teflon. So what is not sticking to me will stick to everybody else. And that will provide me with an opportunity to slide round on the outside again. Because I am a combination of Winston Churchill and Alexander the Great. That's why I couldn't join Lee in Frankfurt's Chardonnay party, because I don't think you can. It's like one of those films. Every time you think it's dead, it gets up again, starts chasing you around the attic, like a zombie or a vampire. Well, who knows? Let's carry on talking about it. I am at some point going to shift this bit of the conversation to, you voted for Boris Johnson in 2019. How are you dealing with what's happening now? 0345 6060 973. I'd like to do that, but let's talk to Alpha first, who's in Ealing. Alpha, what would you like to say?
Good morning. It's very nice to speak to you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.
I quite like what you said about the zombie, because quite literally Boris Johnson will always keep propping up.
He does.
In my eyes, as a Conservative, he will never be honest, he will never be honourable, and I hope that it doesn't completely paint all Conservatives as bad, because there are opponents to him and his supporters, like myself, who genuinely dislike their character, and they needlessly make it harder for us to try and progress in terms of our agenda and the manifesto from 2019 and future manifestos as well. And on progression as well, it's actually regressive, because we can't focus on rebuilding the country since Boris Johnson's behaviour is entitled, and where he thinks his messages can't be under investigation.
No, I know, but you can't rebuild the country until you've admitted that Brexit is a disaster.
Well, I'd say Brexit, of course, has its failures, and even Nigel Farage says Brexit has its failures.
Have a listen to this, because you know the Australian trade deal kicked in this week?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
This is Australian breakfast television yesterday.
Free trade agreement with the UK. Some British products will become cheaper. Exciting news. I just wonder, what does Britain actually have to offer us? I mean, there's beautiful MGs. If you can imagine the top down, Matty, riding. Here we are. This is you riding to the Callide Power Station earlier this morning with the top down. Your hair blowing freely in the wind. Oh, hang on. The MG's owned by a Chinese company.
Yeah, that's right. That's
so
true.
What else do they have? There's black pudding, Cumberland sausages. That's about it, isn't it?
Carlos, there's a Spice Girls CDs, a nice cup of English breakfast tea. Don't be so hard on the Brits.
All right, name one good export from the UK, Matty.
It's hard, isn't it? I suppose. The peas pies. I don't know. Yeah, it's very hard. But this is about what we sell to them, Carl. It's a good thing for us. Good thing for us because we get to sell more beef, and that's great for everybody in Australia.
All right.
Anyway, back to the good Tories, Alpha.
Yes, well, I do think, me personally as well, I wasn't so keen on Brexit. Of course, I think that EU has its issues with democracy.
You voted for it, though.
I didn't vote for it, actually. I voted against it. Too young, exactly. Okay. Too young. But every single member of the current Conservative Party is telling us that Brexit was a great idea and that it's going brilliantly. So who are the ones we should be listening to instead? Well, in theory, I think in terms of sovereignty and in terms of democracy, Brexit does seem to be credible. But then again, it's very good for our economy, and it probably could have helped us get out of the hangover of the pandemic, let's say.
That was just words. I know that wasn't what you were expecting to talk about when you rang in, but you did say that there are lots of good Conservatives out there and we shouldn't be distracted by Boris Johnson. So I asked you where they are. Well,
in the party, I'd say obviously the backbenchers who rebelled against him. And
which ones?
One could say the One Nation Caucus.
Well, they all got, 39 of them got expelled in 2019. So which ones are we talking about?
People like Bin Matalami, for example, people who were obviously opponents to Johnson and his sort of attitude.
Is he? Yeah, okay. I haven't got the facts at my fingertips. Are we sure that they're not all leaving at the next election?
What, in terms of not running? Yeah. For the Conservative, probably they won't, because I mean it's not electorally smart, thanks to a lot of problems that have happened in the past few years. Nonetheless, I completely agree with you. He's hit his self-destruct button, and he's clearly entitled to the point where he thinks that he doesn't even have to be held accountable.
Why is Rishi Sunak trying to keep all the evidence away from the inquiry?
God knows, but surely he's got something to do with it if that's the case. And it's very shameful. It is very shameful, because genuinely we should be focusing on moving on. But because of people like these people and their attitudes, it's really hard. And it makes being a Conservative harder for me as well.
So did you vote in 2019? Were you old enough to vote then?
No, I wasn't old enough. No.
Okay. So, I mean... But you would have voted Tory if you could have done in 2019.
Probably. I quite like the idea of levelling up. I was going to move to the north as well. I quite liked a lot of things in the manifesto. I thought it's a new type of.
What did levelling up mean, do you think? And how's it happened?
Levelling up is essentially for me the investment into places in the north, and I can see that clearly they are continuing with it, with trying to build financial sectors in Liverpool and Manchester, as announced by Hunt in his March statement, in his March budget. But
so you think that levelling up meant opening financial sectors in northern cities? And
also investment in northern sectors as well, because of course the more we invest in different parts of the country, the more strong our economy will be.
You sound like you're auditioning to be a Conservative MP rather than being a caller to a radio show that feasts upon evidence and facts every day. So what sort of investment in what you call northern sectors are we talking about here? Because I think by all accounts, including your parties, it hasn't happened.
So in terms of investment in the north, if we look at the financial sector, for example...
But we've just said we're not going to look at the financial sector because the Red Wall voters who were persuaded by Boris Johnson in 2019 are not disaffected city workers looking for a move to the northwest, are they?
Oh, but of course, it's an excellent idea to probably prop up their economies, their local economies.
My patience is wearing a little thin. It does sound. I don't want to be rude. It does sound almost as if you're reading from a laminated sheet. In terms of big wins and big deliveries, let's talk. Should we talk about the 40 hospitals? That was in the manifesto, wasn't it?
Yeah.
How's that working out for you?
Not very well, but then again, we had COVID, so surely we can see that there is obviously things like COVID, which
how would COVID render hospitals that we were promised never to be built now?
Because the financing for the hospitals would now all have to be diverted to welfare, such as furlough, in order to stop mass unemployment.
But that's simply not true, is it? No one's even arguing that they've run out of money to build the hospitals. It was a lie when it started.
Now.
It was a lie when it started. I mean, we sat here and said they're claiming that a refurbishment is a new hospital. Listen, you fascinate me, and I am conscious of your youth, so I don't want to either be patronising or rude. But if without using words like in terms of and sector and you know what I would call politico speak, what is the sort of credo? What is the belief you hold that makes you think there is a Conservative Party, albeit one that doesn't really contain any of the prominent parliamentarians at the moment? There is a Conservative Party to which you feel drawn. What is it they represent?
Social conservatism, firstly.
But again, that's just jargon, isn't it? What do you mean by that?
So conserving family values, conserving...
What does family values mean? Because you're talking about a party that put Boris Johnson in charge just a few years ago.
Yeah, but then again, Boris Johnson has a family of his own, so...
He has several.
Yes, yeah. But
and children born out of wed. Where does that fit into family values?
Then again, though, like I said, there aren't many good representations of conservatism.
No, but that's why I'm asking for some. I'm asking for what it is you believe in, because the Conservative Party in its current form is the party of Boris Johnson, a sexually incontinent adulterer. It's not the party of family values. So what is?
What other parties are there?
No. What are the family values to which you refer? Where is the evidence that this party is the? What do you mean by family values?
Family values to me is the belief in the nuclear family, first of all.
Oh boy! So you don't. So we're opposed to equal marriage now, are we?
No, if you can do what you want, but of course this is my view.
Yeah, but that's why I'm asking you. That is your view, is it? That equal marriage is not equal.
What do you mean by equal marriage?
Well, you know what the word equal means. You think a marriage between two people of the same sex is not nuclear?
Of course not. Quite literally, it's not. But then
okay. No, I mean, it took me a while, but I was intrigued by where you were coming from, and now we know. So, family values means that Boris Johnson is okay, but two faithful, loving gay men raising children are not.
You can do what you like as a couple. I'm not going to intervene it, but I have my.
We got there in the end. It always takes a while sometimes, which is of course why you deployed all that ludicrous jargon at the outset in order to avoid getting to the heart of it. Did you go to that conference last week where the comments about the Holocaust involving the Germans mucking up were made? Were you there?
No, I wasn't. No.
Why not?
That's disgusting. That's a disgusting comment.
But they were talking about family values all the time. And the nuclear family. Didn't Danny Kruger stand up and say exactly what you've just said?
What did he say?
He talked about the nuclear family and the denigration of equal marriage.
Are you alluding that the idea of the
not alluding anything, mate. I'm pointing out that at the conference you've just described as disgusting, people were saying exactly what you've just said on national radio.
What when you told me that they're speaking about nuts and so on?
No, when they were talking about the nuclear family, that was two different people, two different speakers at the same conference. That's the only reason why I wondered whether you'd been there, because I did find myself wondering who the hell would applaud that sort of bigotry. But I guess now we know. 19 minutes after 11 is the time. Elena points out I should have wished our last caller a happy Pride Month. So belatedly, Alpha, happy Pride Month. Boris Johnson fans, all right? And now I do have this phrase, contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned. And I also have a bit of an ace in the hole on this one. I have a bit of a joker in my back pocket in that I voted for Boris Johnson to be Mayor of London in 2008, would it be? I think. A long time ago, anyway. And I repented at leisure. I didn't think that, well, I don't need to justify myself. I just fell for the shtick. I fell for the amnesty on illegal. I've done it myself. I said yesterday that I still fall into this. People who have come here through unlawful channels, perhaps, or people who don't have a legal right to be here, good people, human people. Boris Johnson talked about offering them an amnesty so that they could work in the legal economy rather than the illegal economy, something that everybody sensible would quite like. And also I'd seen him on Have I Got News for You, and when our paths crossed here, it always made you feel a bit special when he sort of said, "Hello, comrade." I've told cycling down Charing Cross Road, I'm with a mate of mine, and Boris Johnson says, "Comrade O'Brien," like this. And I felt it was, oh, that's nice. Didn't take me long. I think it was the tube. It was the firefighters, wasn't it? It was the promise not to shut any fire stations, and I realised pretty quickly that was a complete lie. And that was the point. That was it. That was the end of my brief flirtation with Boris Johnson. So I get it. I can't sit here on my high horse, or not as high as it usually is. And let's be honest, it's usually pretty high. I can't sit here on the highest horse in the land saying, how could anybody ever have fallen for this joker? Because I did. So if in 2019 you voted for him, or even you thought he was nice, you thought he was a nice lad, how are you dealing with this now? How are you well, it's not even him anymore, is it? Because he's done the hand grenade over the back of the shoulder. I've just noticed something in paragraph 7 of the letter I read out to you earlier that I should have picked up on sooner, but that's the nature of breaking news. This is really it. Can you see if you can spot it? Ready? I have asked the Cabinet Office for assistance in turning it on securely. This is the phone that he claims he couldn't turn on because the same security services that told him not to put Evgeny Lebedev in the House of Lords told him not to turn on his phone after it emerged that the number had been in the public domain for the duration of his mayoralty and indeed his his prime ministerial career. I have asked the Cabinet Office for assistance in turning it on securely so that I can search it for all relevant material. I propose to pass all such material directly to you. Have you spotted it? Have you spotted it? Shall I read it again? All right, come on. Right, pay attention, especially you at the back. Ready? I have asked the Cabinet Office for assistance in turning it on securely so that I can search it for all relevant material. I propose to pass all such material directly to you. Relevant. The entire judicial review is based upon Rishi Sunak's belief that he should get to decide what's relevant and not the person who's actually leading the inquiry into the COVID handling. That's why they're going to court. I will decide what is relevant, not you, you pesky impartial judge over there. It's the accused deciding what should be evidence and what should not be. So Johnson patting himself on the back and giving his Tesco halo, it's not fair on Tesco, giving his Poundland halo a bit of, that's not fair on Poundland, giving his Pound Shop halo a bit of a polish. I have asked the Cabinet Office for assistance in turning it on securely so that I can search it for all relevant material. Relevant. Relevant. Relevant the elephant. That's the elephant in the room. Oh, that was good. That's the relevant in the room. He thinks he should decide what gets passed on and what doesn't. So here's what he should have written. I have asked the Cabinet Office for assistance in turning it on securely. No, not even that. Here it is. Here's the phone. I trust that you will be able to turn it on securely. Here's the phone with the messages on it. So he's done it again. Relevant material. So here's the question. It's not about Boris Johnson. It's not about Rishi Sunak. It's about this, all right? And I don't have much patience for people who talk about nuclear families or people who talk about family values when really what they mean is a very prescriptive and oppressive Victorian worldview that allows the hypocrisies and the deceits and the betrayals of people like Boris Johnson to run through with a free pass. It's cobblers. It's like the Daily Mail claiming to represent British values when publishing front pages attacking High Court judges, attacking parliamentary democracy and attacking academic freedom. Get rid of those three and there aren't really any British values left. So I don't have much patience with that, in case you were wondering. But what I do have is a modicum of respect for people who see themselves as conservative, with a large C. Dominic Grieve on with Nick Ferrari this morning. Chris Patton on Question Time last night, describing in terms the absolute carnage that's been inflicted on our country as a consequence of various issues, up to and including Boris Johnson. So what has happened to your party? I'd love you to answer that question. Just think of it in this simple nexus, right? Forget Liz Truss. It's easily done. Unless you're trying to get a new mortgage, of course. Forget Liz Truss. Johnson calls an inquiry. Sunak tries to prevent it getting all the evidence that it wants to get. That is the same party, Chancellor of the Exchequer in Boris Johnson's government, now trying to scupper or at least limit the access to evidence enjoyed by the head of the inquiry that he called. What's happened to your party? How do you account for this? There's no gloating from me. I'll tell you what, I wish you could have seen into the studio when we were playing that clip from Australia. Got right up my nose. How dare they laugh at us like that? Even if some of us were pointing out that we were turning ourselves into a country that would become precisely the laughingstock those Australian television presenters just portrayed us as, I still hate it. It's like family, isn't it? I can say what I want about my family, but you slag off my mum, and we're going to have words. We're going to have serious words. Listening to Australians laughing at us for becoming the first country in the history of humanity to impose economic sanctions on itself, signing a trade deal that gives them jackpots galore. And do you know how they even sold it in the Telegraph? Yes, we're sending copies of the Beano comic to Australia. They're sending hormone-stuffed beef here, potentially, and we're selling more Beanos. Just laughing at us, like literally laughing at us on live television. I'll play it to you again in a minute because something happens there that doesn't happen very often in live TV studios. You can hear the crew laughing. The cameramen are laughing. They're not supposed to do that. So what's happened? What's happened to your country? To your party, rather. Okay? So no beef. Stay away from the family values stuff. But loads of people who call themselves conservatives aren't bigoted in that way. 0345 6060 973. You've got two of the last three prime ministers now at loggerheads over what evidence the inquiry into the COVID handling should be able to see. It just doesn't make any sense, objectively. So this is your party. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. This is your party. What has happened to it? Okay? The Prime Minister but one, deliberately seeking to undermine the current Prime Minister, who was his Chancellor, over the access that an inquiry called by the former into the handling by all of them of the early days of the COVID crisis doesn't get the evidence that it wants to get. Just have a think and tell what has happened to your party. 0345 6060 973. Lewis is in Dunstable. Lewis, what would you like to say? I know you rang in before I asked that later question, so you can ignore it if you want or not. It's entirely up to you.
Hello, James. I think I can do a little bit on both. I think the problem that's currently happening is that Rishi Sunak has, as you said repeatedly, tried to instill competence, leadership, accountability. And I think what's happened is that all the messages that could be handed over aren't necessarily going to damage Rishi, but it's going to damage more Tory MPs than perhaps Rishi anticipated. And he's getting pressured from them and perhaps outside
it won't be MPs. It'll only be cabinet level, I think.
Cabinet ministers, as you say. And it's going to prevent them from launching leadership bids and going to prevent them from winning future elections. So it's almost like Rishi Sunak has a poison chalice, and rather than letting the public see what's inside the chalice, Rishi Sunak is choosing to drink it to protect the party, protect his interests, and sort of take the problem on himself because he knows the next election's in trouble.
So even if the legal action fails, the chance of it succeeding is still worth rolling the dice at this point because the stakes are so high.
Exactly. Yeah. And then what it will do is it will prove to not only the cabinet ministers, to backbench MPs, to all the Tories and their supporters and outside support as well, it will prove that Rishi Sunak is a true conservative and is willing to go down for the party. Meanwhile, Boris thinks that if all these messages are going to come out, it's going to clear any other cabinet minister from posing a threat in any future election because they're going to be damaged. And as you say, he's like Teflon. He thinks he can ride that challenge out.
Well, look what I've got away with. Look what I've got away with. It was only the flipping Chris Pincher and the parties that did for me. It wasn't the putting people in the House of Lords against the advice of MI5. It wasn't the let the bodies pile high. It was none of the stuff I've spent my entire career getting away with is actually what got me in the end. So I can waltz through this as well, come out the other side. I'll be the only man left standing.
Exactly. And then the Conservative sort of supporting media or press or anything like that, they will be more supportive of Boris and more willing to protect Boris, but all the other smaller cabinet ministers and those looking to become cabinet minister affected won't have that protection, and that will completely clear the line.
Well, I hope you're wrong. But what you have done is articulate why I couldn't join Lee in Frankfurt in a nice, it's a bit early for me anyway, but a nice chilled glass of Chardonnay, because that sense that the stake has been driven through the vampire's heart, you're not there yet, and I'm not either, Lewis.
No, but I think the other element is perhaps Rishi Sunak and Boris have failed to realise the long game Keir Starmer was playing. Keir Starmer, I think, saw what potential this could be, not the goldmine that it might have turned out to be. And Keir Starmer laid all these traps when he thought that...
You're the second caller this week to say this, and I like it as an analysis. I'm not fully on board with it. It's a little bit 4D chess, isn't it? But I looked back over it after a caller said it earlier this week, and there were quite a few times, not like hundreds, but there were certainly a few times where he did lead Johnson down a line and then say, OK, well, we'll leave that there. That's what you're talking about, isn't it?
I'll pick that up in a future date. And even if it's just a case of he can put it on his promotional material for elections, look at what your party stood for. I tried to stand up for this, and then I think as you say, the Currygate idea or Curry scandal, him standing up and saying, I will go down, he's directly sort of showing the two sides of the coin of your party's willing to go to court to prevent you seeing information. I was willing to resign the second that it happened if I got proven wrong.
Yeah. I mean, that is strong stuff, Lewis. Thank you. 11:31 is the time. I don't think we've got anyone. Have we got anyone prepared? My apologies to Ali and Jason and Ken and Matt and others who want to continue this conversation. Have we got anyone prepared to explain what's happened to the party they support? No? And the lad 20 minutes ago had a crack, but that was like, there is a really good Conservative party, but it goes to a different school and promotes nuclear family values. Is there anyone who's going to have a go at Bula? No? Probably talk about farming next then, shall we? Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. It's 11:36. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where, well, there's two things that caught my eye this morning, both of which are relevant to the so-called Australian trade deal that Liz Truss was telling you was wonderful, even as George Eustice, who was farming secretary at the time it was signed, described it in terrible terms. It's a bit similar to the conversation that we've been having all morning about the COVID inquiry and Rishi Sunak's attempts to cover up what was going on at the highest levels of government and Boris Johnson's attempts to turn it all to his own advantage. There's a phrase you can add to the sentence, to the end of any observations about British politics covering the last 10 to 15 years. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson was trying to turn everything to his own advantage. In fact, shall I start adding that to the end of everything I say about politics? I remember when we thought for 10 minutes that we'd seen the end of him. We thought, oh, thank God, we never have to talk about him again. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson was trying to turn everything to his own advantage. It's just cruel. So talk about the Australian trade deal, particularly with relevance to farming. This is one of those moments where I'm not quite sure who I need to be listening to the programme to help me with the conversation that I really want to have. But it's pretty serious. There's a superb piece on the Politico website by a journalist I hadn't come across before, to my shame, really, because he's brilliant, called Graham Langtry. And he's a trade journalist and has got a real in the room where it happens account of that spring 2021 meeting between Boris Johnson and Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister, that essentially sealed the so-called trade deal. It was a dinner like no other, writes Langtry. Two prime ministers sat face-to-face across a grand Westminster dining room, the first ever free trade agreement between their nations, all but complete. On the table that evening were bottles of fine Australian wine, a rack of Welsh lamb, and the future. This is where, if you know any farmers, and they're not currently listening to the programme, this is where you need to give them a call and tell them to tune in, because the final line of this opening paragraph is this: on the table, wine, lamb, and the future of the UK farming industry. Right? Can you get me that Patrick Minford quote from ages ago when Rory Stewart asked him in the Select Committee about the benefits? When Patrick Minford said to Rory Stewart that Brexit would mean the destruction of UK industry and agriculture. All right? I played it out about 1,000 times from 2016 to 2018, but it's pertinent today. So this is spring 2021, and according to this report, which is incredibly well sourced, it even saw Boris Johnson apologising personally to Scott Morrison for Britain's decision to join the EU almost 50 years earlier. And here's the line, right? He signed away greater access to Britain's beef markets than had ever been conceived by his senior officials. So remember, Boris Johnson's need to be loved, or his need to see himself as lovable and popular in any context, isn't just public, it happens in private as well. So he's sitting at a table with the Australian Prime Minister, and he's so desperate for approval that he actually gives the Australian Prime Minister more than even his own trade negotiators were asking for. Observers saw it as a jaw-dropping concession. Johnson's International Trade Secretary, Liz Truss, was livid when she learned of the agreement over breakfast the following morning, as the leaders prepared to announce the deal before the world's media. Because if Johnson doesn't care about anybody except himself, this is so important. I love it when sort of pennies drop. If Johnson doesn't care about anybody except himself, then in the context of a negotiation, he's going to do whatever delights the person sitting opposite him the most. He's not thinking, I've got to take this back to British farmers. He's thinking, oh, look, Scott Morrison, I'm going to make him love me. So he says, yeah, all right, you can have greater access to the British beef markets than even your own senior officials have been asking for. Hours later, Liz Truss, who continues to pretend that she signed something good or worthwhile or valuable, is livid when she learns what he's done. Two people familiar with events told Politico. Dan Tehan, Australia's chief negotiator, told Truss, your boss, shall I do the accent? No. Your boss has already conceded the whole kingdom. Dan Tehan, Australia's chief negotiator, told Truss gleefully. According to one former senior UK minister, George Eustice, in my personal opinion, possibly George Eustice, involved in the negotiations, told that to Politico. For the next 6 months, until the deal was formally signed in December, UK government lawyers tried frantically to paper over the Prime Minister's last-minute giveaway to Canberra with limited success. Listen, there's a chance that you're a beef farmer, and this is the first you've heard of this. Only got published this morning. Not about the concessions, you're probably across that, but about the grim circumstances in which Boris Johnson essentially gave you up. The deal, which as you know comes into effect this week, described by Minette Batters, the president of the National Farmers Union, who once on this programme, have we got that clip as well? She once on this programme told me that she had no choice but to trust Boris Johnson. And when she said those words, I actually involuntarily groaned. And she said, I have to trust him, or she said, I do trust him. And I actually went, uh-oh. And it wasn't performative or deliberate or intentional. It just crept out. Someone said, I'm going to trust Boris Johnson. Even now, I can almost do it again. It's almost like like hitting someone's knee with a hammer, and the knee goes, whoa, up it goes. I'm going to trust Boris. Oh, my God, don't ever trust Boris Johnson. She has said it was a real breach of trust and confidence for farmers. The president of the NFU describes the anger is still visceral. Still visceral. This journalist spoke to 5 senior people close to the negotiations on either side of the table to reconstruct these crucial final hours before the deal was struck, and all of them described this turn of events. A spokesman for Boris Johnson described the story as rubbish. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson was desperately trying to turn events to his own advantage. It's utterly breathtaking, this. And it's long. It's a good 10-minute read. I've tweeted it from my account, and I will tweet it again now, because it's exceptional journalism, albeit, a couple of years late. It won't have come as a major surprise to any farmers. So have another listen to what they were doing on Australia. Caroline says they don't need to be loved, they just want to be admired. I think in the context we're discussing, Caroline, it's the same thing, really. Although it didn't work. They must have been laughing at Johnson as they left the room. But have a listen to Australian breakfast television yesterday as they greet news. There's another clip from New Zealand telly from last year when they were just expressing utter disbelief at what we've done. And then we'll have a little look about what it means for British farmers. So this is how we look now. to the outside world, or to Australia in particular. Remember, this week, they're telling you to celebrate the New Deal. We couldn't have signed it when we were in the EU. We've got a brilliant New Deal. Go Britain. Rule Britannia. Britannia rules. Yay. Taking back control. Yay. Yay. And this is how it looks from Australia.
Free trade agreement with the UK. Some British products will become cheaper. Exciting news. I just wonder, what does Britain actually have to offer us? I mean, there's beautiful MGs. If we can imagine the top down, Matty, riding. Here we are. This is you riding to the Callide Power Station earlier this morning with the top down. Your hair blowing freely in the wind. Oh, hang on. The MG's owned by a Chinese company.
Yeah, that's right. That's
so
true.
What else do they have? There's black pudding, Cumberland sausages. That's about it, isn't it?
Carlos, there's like Spice Girls CDs, a nice cup of English breakfast tea. Don't be so hard on the Brits.
All right. Name one good export from the UK, Matty.
It's hard, isn't it? I suppose. The peas pies. I don't know. Yeah, it's very hard. But this is about what we sell to them, Carl. It's a good thing for us. Good thing for us because we get to sell more beef, and that's great for everybody in Australia.
All right.
I mean, seriously, get lost, lads. It's not funny. I guess unless you're Australian. They're literally there laughing at how pathetic we have become in the context of this trade deal that they are still telling you. It got Liz Truss into Downing Street, claiming that this was brilliant, claiming that this was, world-beating. I just don't know yet. Liz in Cricklade's on the line. She's brilliant on this kind of stuff. We'll talk to her shortly. I've got something else I want to do at 12, but this depends entirely upon how many farmers are listening to the programme or how many people qualified to comment on this are listening to the programme. I don't want calls from anybody else on this. But as a farmer, what does this mean to you, potentially? You've had a miserable time of it for years now, and it's an incredibly stressful livelihood at the best of times. But you've probably had longer to pick over what this was likely to mean. You've probably heard Minette Batters, your president, the president of the National Farmers Union, describe it as, a betrayal, if you like. Describe it in real terms. How is it actually going to affect you? The anger is still visceral, she says. What is the likely impact upon your life, your farm, your livelihood of this trade deal that, of course, Liz Truss trumpeted to such a degree that the credulous members of the Conservative Party cheered her all the way into Downing Street? That's why she did it. I told you this at the time. All those tweets, we've done this and we've done that. And everyone was looking at her approval ratings and going, what's Liz Truss doing that's got her such high approval ratings among the Conservative Party membership? I said, she's just pretending. She's literally telling members that sow's ear over there is a silk purse. Every single time she signs something, it lets people pretend that Brexit was a good idea. And right now, between 2019 and 2022, letting people pretend that Brexit was a good idea was absolute jackpot territory for an ambitious Tory cabinet minister, as was proved when she actually got into Downing Street, letting people pretend that Brexit was a good idea. But here's some reality coming home to roost. Here it is. Australia's laughing at us. Farmers are furious. What's it going to mean? What's it going to do? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. I'd love you to call me directly from the tractor. 0345 6060 973. It is 11:51. It is a truly extraordinary article, this, I have to tell you. I mean, it contains people like David Frost. You remember him? He's in the House of Lords now, inevitably. And others denying the version of events put forward by the majority of the sources. But goodness me, the simple headline tells you everything you really need to know. How Boris Johnson sold out Britain's farmers over dinner with the Australian PM. And I am tweeting that from my account at Mr. James OB now, so that you can have a proper read of it. It's grim reading. I mean, I've said to you so many times lately that being proved right about stuff is not fun. So you thought it would be, maybe. Vindication, valid. It's awful because people like Liz in Cricklade are going to be at the sharp end of it, and they've seen what's on the horizon for a long time, even as politicians insisted otherwise. I hope that's a fair description of your situation, Liz.
Morning, James.
Hello.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. I was just sitting here thinking I'm going to rival you for being right because actually everything I said that was going to happen has happened. And it's galling to be right because I would have preferred to be wrong. I know Graham, actually. We've worked together a bit over the years because I run Save British Food, and I guess that's the reality, isn't it? Everything I said that would happen has happened.
Hang on, I'm just going to pause you there, because there is a chance, of course, that we're both wrong. Steve's been in touch to say you are a fool. Australian people work in bars. They love the UK. Otherwise, they wouldn't come. So Steve has a helpful counterbalance to the big breakfast television show laughing at us uproariously yesterday. Back to your experiences. Thank you, Steve. Thanks, great. Mate. Thanks, Steve.
So yes, for some people like Steve, he probably won't care about where his steak comes from and how it's reared, and how many miles it's taken to get here, and how much cruelty it's gone through, and how many chemicals are in it. But ultimately, this was inevitable. And when the NFU actually caved in, it was the moment that this was inevitable over the standards in the Agriculture Act, and that's when not just us British farmers, but you British consumers were sold out, because you're going to be eating this stuff, and our lovely, gorgeous British animals are going to be rarer than they are now, and it's an absolute travesty for British health and our countryside. It's a disaster. I'm furious about it. I mean, I actually had a sneak preview of this yesterday. I cried about it yesterday, and now my anger is up because the deceit around this is sickening. And you know, if they told everybody at the outset Brexit's going to mean that you're going to be eating this stuff, everybody would have voted for British food. I mean, there's nothing more nationalistic than your food. And there's good reason to be nationalistic about your food, because the closer that your food comes from to you, the better the stuff tastes, the better it is for you, the better it is for the environment. And it's also better for food security, because you know, tensions in the world are very high.
As we've seen in Ukraine, we saw in COVID, the more you produce of your own food, the better. But you know what the Tufton Street mantra is, which is, you know, the cheaper the better. The fewer regulations there are, the fewer standards there are, the more money you can make. Is there even and I know this will be anathema to you, but for some people listening to this, the idea of knocking a quid off their ready meal lasagna, or buying a steak that might have some unfortunate hormones in it, but unless I start growing breasts, I'm not going to worry about that. They're just going to be looking at the cost. And are they likely to have what they dream of? Just cheaper meat, albeit less good?
Well, it won't stay cheaper. It'll be cheaper until we're out of business. That's how it works.
And then it'll be the only meat we can buy, so they can set whatever price they want for it.
Yeah, I mean, there will be premium British meat available, the same as you can get premium fur.
Down the farmer's market.
Yeah, well, it'll be higher than that, won't it? Because it'll only be the wealthiest farmers that will be able to afford to produce this, you know, really good beef. So it completely and utterly...
Is it an existential threat? Because, you know as well as I do that there is precious little chance of rejoining anytime soon. And until this deal is almost undone, or is undone, the import of the meat you're describing, the more comes in, the greater the existential threat to British beef farmers, as I understand it.
And I keep trying to explain this to Remainers on Twitter.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of time. If
That's
we're
what I
going to
mean.
undo this,
yes.
we don't have much time. George Eustace, we should be grateful to.
Well, let's not.
No, there is something. Let me give you a proviso here.
Okay.
He did ensure there's a 6-month exit clause. He also ensured that the quotas were actually better in the first 5 years.
Okay, fair enough.
So we have got not a lot of time to sort this out. The worry to me is that as we go into the winter of hell, which we are going into, and food shortages intensify, that there will be an excuse for them to turn around and say, oh, we've got food shortages, so bugger the quotas, let it all in. And that is the danger. And it's why Labour need to move faster on this, because the nationalism on food is very powerful, and it's also around food security as national security. They need to get off the fence and they need to start fighting. You've got all the evidence now that Britain was deceived. So let's make hay about this.
It's a remarkable piece. I listen. Thank you for all you do in this field. I know you're very, very active, as you say, in social media and beyond. And thank you for helping us come to a better understanding of what's at stake. I do, however, just want to refresh my memory of that conversation with Minette Batters that we had in 2021, because I've got a feeling it might be quite pertinent listening. Liz, thank you. It's 11:57.
So there's a whole raft of things, James, on standards that need to be maintained in future trade deals.
And that possibly I oversimplify things, and you appreciate the complexities and complications of the issues, but there is this reported rift between George Eustice and Michael Gove on one side and Liz Truss and apparently the Prime Minister on the other side that does, for good or for ill, boil down to a zero tariff deal. If a zero tariff deal with Australia is announced, whatever the timescale for its introduction might be. I read a piece in the Telegraph yesterday from somebody sort of suggesting that that's just tough luck on farmers who will go bankrupt.
Well, you could take that attitude. My job is to represent farmers and make sure that their case is heard by government. And you know, it's not just about George Eustice in all of this. The Prime Minister has made cast iron.
We keep coming back to this, and I am going to, I'm afraid, remind you that he made cast iron guarantees to the people of Northern Ireland and business people in Northern Ireland about the likelihood of there being any border put in the Irish Sea. So where are you deriving your confidence that he'll keep his promises to you?
Well, he is the Prime Minister, and my job is to hold him to account.
He was Prime Minister when he promised there'd be no checks on trade with Northern Ireland from the Great Britain mainland.
He was, but this is where the power of the people is so important. You know, the people have put him into that place. They've got a massive majority government. The people of this country drew a line in the sand last year when over 1 million people in 2 weeks signed up to this and said they wanted trade to be fair. They wanted food imports to be produced to the same standards. I don't believe they will ever forgive him if he reneges on that commitment. And we see a mass departure of farmers in our countryside. So he has to keep to his word. And, you know, I certainly intend to keep banging the drum and making sure that he does. Now, of course, that is his decision.
Yes.
But we really do need to make sure that this is done right. And I think after COVID, you know, so many people have enjoyed walking in the countryside. So many people have only been able to cook. They've been buying out of retail. They haven't been able to go to the hotels and pubs and restaurants like we normally do. And they value their food, and they want to make sure that farmers in this country can possibly even produce more food so that we're not reliant on other countries on shipping food right the way across the world while we put our own farmers out of business. That would be a dereliction of duty by any Prime Minister, and I hope this one will stick to his commitment. But I share your concerns of the past.
And in conclusion, then, you are, in many ways, the future of British farming depends upon Boris Johnson's ability to keep his word.
It certainly does. It certainly does. And don't forget when he signs up to this paves the way for decades to come, because when we're working under WTO rules, you can't change it. So it's vital he gets this right.
God, that's horrible, actually. It was worse than I remembered. It wasn't an involuntary groan. It was an uh-oh at the end there. We need to catch up with Minette, don't we, at some point? But I imagine she's got rather bigger fish to fry at the moment. I'm going to return next to our Cultural Fridays. The fun that we've had at 12 o'clock on Fridays, discussing stuff a little bit out of the ordinary, a little bit left field. It's quite a sad story. Well, hang on. It's about languages and the creative arts falling out of favour among GCSE and A-level students. Now, I think that's very sad and potentially quite injurious to the national interest. But I could, of course, be wrong. We'll find out after this. Hello, 5 minutes after 12 is the time. Complete change of pace now. That was a bit weird, wasn't it? That was 2 hours that felt like a curious mixture of Groundhog Day and a distillation of the last few years that we've spent together, even going a bit Brexity for the last half an hour. I wish this wasn't true, but none of it's going away. Boris Johnson's going to remain newsworthy for the foreseeable future until the COVID inquiry is complete, and then God only knows what happens. And, of course, Brexit is going to grow in relevance. How long ago was it people were saying, you've got to move on, you've got to stop talking about it? Tell that to the farmers. Tell that to the beef farmers. Tell that to the car industry. Tell that to people struggling to pay their... Oh, no, we've got to stop talking about it. No one's interested. No one's interested. Incredible, really. 6 minutes after 12 is the time. However, I do want a complete change of topic and pace now. I like these conversations that we have sometimes on Fridays because they're often quite uplifting, aren't they? We talk about books or plays or theatre or the opera. This story stopped me in my tracks, I've got to be honest. But the thing about education, albeit that my children are of a relevant age, so I'm not quite as out of the loop as I was, for example, 10 years ago. I caught myself one day, I don't know if you remember, I caught myself one day preparing to pontificate about universities, about tertiary education. And I suddenly realised I had no right whatsoever to offer up any opinion at all. I had no clue about what the state of university education was like these days, because I hadn't been there for, I say, 25 years, roughly, at the time that I realised that I was about to start pontificating about universities based entirely upon my own personal experiences that were no longer relevant. You get it a lot in the British media, usually ageing white men like me, pontificating upon subjects from a perspective of their experiences decades previously. Richard Littlejohn's made an entire career out of it, sort of penchant for the 1950s or the 1960s or the 1970s. It is quite bizarre. And it was very helpful because the minute I said, God, I've got no idea what I'm talking about, people who had been at university more recently or who were at university as we spoke, helped me out, educated me, illuminated me. So this story is about GCSEs and A-levels, right? It's a while since I was in that particular room. However, I have got children who are in both of those rooms, so I know a little bit about it, but perhaps not as much as I should. And it's about languages and the creative arts falling out of favour. These are provisional figures that show exam entries for German have fallen by 17% for A-level students and 6% for GCSEs. Spanish and French have fallen similar amounts. And what's coming up the charts are computing and business studies and subjects that we would describe as being more vocational. And when you're doing GCSEs, you're doing about 9 subjects, so you could, in a sense, have the best of both worlds. I appreciate the need to focus a little bit more as you head into your A-levels. It's a shame we don't do something a bit more like the baccalaureate, where you manage to keep more plates spinning for longer. But coming at it from 16-year-old and 18-year-old me, I find this really sad and worrying. But of course, I've been out of the game for over 30 years, so it may be that I am saddened and worrying needlessly. Did you know that I was the first year of GCSEs? You were born in 1972, you were 16 in 1988. You were the very first year of GCSEs. Prior to that, it was O-levels. Did you know that? That was me. I was there. I did O-levels as well. I did 6 O-levels a year early, and then I did four GCSEs and 2 O-levels the next year. But in 1988, we were the first year of GCSEs. Just a little historical anomaly for you, a little nugget of completely needless trivia. But I still benefit more, I think, from the study of language and the creative arts than I do from the study of more vocational subjects. I didn't do computing. There you go. There's the first fly in the ointment of my theory, because I kind of wish I had. I've got this. When a child says to you, particularly a teenager, says to you, "Why do I need to study this?" I find it quite hard to answer. It could be Pythagoras' theorem, or it could be Shakespeare. Why do I need to study this? And you say, well, it will serve you well in later life. And they say, I don't want to be like you, mate. I'm not going to march around quoting Shakespeare all the time. I remember when I was 15, my maths teacher said that Pythagoras' theorem would come in useful if I ever needed to mark out the touchlines on a rugby pitch. I said, what? He goes, well, if you ever needed to mark out the touchlines on a rugby pitch and you wanted a perfect right angle, then Pythagoras' theorem would be absolutely crucial. I remember thinking at the time that likelihood of me ever having to mark out the touchlines on a rugby pitch is pretty slim already. And I reckon I could do a fairly good job of doing 2 straight lines at a 90-degree angle without the benefit of Pythagoras' theorem. You could just use a set square, couldn't you? And then measure the length. Anyway, I struggle to justify. I've come up with this. I said, why do you think you do PE? And I said, I don't know. So, well, you do PE to build up your muscles and your strength and your skill set. Now, you don't know. You're probably not going to be required to throw medicine balls around at any stage later in life, but you may be called upon to use the muscles that you've developed as a consequence of doing PE. So I say maths and English and geography, those subjects are like that. You're developing muscles, intellectual muscles that you will be able to deploy later in life, and that is the point of education. To which some of the young people in my life respond by saying, but that's just silly. I'm never going to go and live in Spain. Why would I want to learn Spanish? What muscle is that? I said, well, it's a very helpful muscle it gives you more choices. How do you know at your tender age? So young, I say, and untender. And they say, I've told you to stop quoting Shakespeare. So young and so untender. How do you know that you're never going to go and live in Spain? You might want, what if you change your mind? What if you fall in love with a Spaniard? So, well, he'll be able to speak English. Otherwise, how are we ever going to fall in love? Well, what about all the Spaniards who can't speak English with whom you might fall in love if you could speak Spanish? You are closing down all of these avenues of life. The more you know, the more you learn, the more choices you have, the more doors appear in front of you. But I don't know anymore, because I'm looking at this story and I'm thinking maybe you should have done computing and business studies instead of history and philosophy. What did I do? History, English, politics, and a side order of religious studies, because that was the nature of the school that I went to. Don't have a language. I did languages at O-level, bit of French. Still speak a bit of French. GCSE Spanish. Can't really speak much Spanish. ¿Dónde está el papel higiénico? That's very crucial, by the way, depending on what you had for dinner the night before. But I'm doing that thing now that I've noticed the Conservative Party doing in recent years, which is denigrating disciplines that don't have an immediate material benefit. So that's my first question to you. Why should you study stuff that doesn't have an immediate application in adult life? And I'd like your clever answers, your thoughtful answers to that. 0345 6060 973. Some of the best stuff I studied was at university, and it was actually the history of science, the philosophy of science, talking about paradigm shifts and how there's no such thing as knowledge. There's only the best available explanation for the currently known evidence. And I find that constantly illuminating. The work of John Rawls, I've told you, the philosopher John Rawls, has informed so much of my political thinking, and yet none of that really. I remember my dad saying there aren't many job vacancies for philosophers down at the job centre, son. He was joking. He didn't think it was a waste of time, but he was just fond of a well-turned gag. And there aren't many job vacancies for philosophers, although oddly, about a month after he told me that, there was a story in the paper about a pub in the Lake District advertising for a philosopher to sit in the bar and do philosophy. So I cut it out of the newspaper and sent it to him. But what's the point of doing philosophy? So that's where we are on this, isn't it? Why is it? Well, I'm working on the presumption that it's sad, that a decline in creative arts and languages, or broadly put, subjects that you can't immediately turn into money, right? Subjects that do not necessarily involve a sellable skill, right? And then languages which do things to your brain that are good. It's sad to me that they're in decline. That's question number one. Is it sad to you? If not, because I'm quite interested in the not, why not? You're listening to this and you're going, why would anyone want to do that when they could do computing or business studies? I think it's sad that languages and creative arts are on the decline. And I think it's sad because they give you something almost indescribable. This is a typical O'Brien phone-in, isn't it? Give me a ring and describe something indescribable. They give you something that is hard to put into words. What use is that to me in later life? It changes the way you think. Critical thinking. I'll tell you what, if we'd all done critical thinking at school, we never would have had Brexit. There's an advantage of studying things, or at least learning the skills of study. Question people. Someone stands up and tells a lie, you'll be able to recognise that it's a lie. Some people still won't care, especially if it's a racist lie, but lots of people who've fallen for the lie rather than the racism, they'd like it. So how do you deal with your children? Do you try and steer them towards... So what do you do? What do you say to a 15-year-old? What age are you when you pick your GCSEs? 13, 14? 14, let's say 14 for the sake of argument, all right? Don't at me. So you've got a 14-year-old who is picking their subjects based upon future career possibilities. And you want them to do creative arts or languages. How do you persuade them that these subjects are valuable? Okay. And then for teachers or parents, why do you think this is happening? Because when I was a kid, business studies wasn't even really a thing. It existed, but nobody really did it. So, and computing was still quite nascent. It was still quite new. So part of the reason that you're seeing one go up and one come down is because the one going up, it just exists more than it used to do. But as a teacher, what for you accounts for the changing balance between arty or creative subjects and more vocational subjects? Is it just that there's an increasing availability of vocational subjects, or are the priorities of students changing and the humanities are in decline? Because if they are, that's a worry. And look at the damage we've done to ourselves as a country already by denigrating empathy and critical thinking. If we're going to have fewer people with that capacity, that capability moving forward, God knows what appalling act of national self-harm we'll undertake next. If you'd like to join this conversation, then hit the numbers now. You will get through. It's 12:20 you're listening to. Oh, you know who you're listening to. Oh, is it a shame? Why is it a shame? Languages and creative arts are in decline. Things like computing and business studies. It's all very Rishi Sunak, isn't it? Business studies are on the increase. Does business studies? If I'd done business studies, would I be Richard Branson now instead of? Seems unlikely. Anyway, Tom's in Crystal Palace. Tom, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, Tom.
I agree. I think it's a big shame that they're in decline. I'm a professional musician. I studied music both at undergraduate and postgraduate level. And when I think about GCSE and A-level education in music specifically, or just the creative arts, the amount that it's changed, even in the last 5 years since I've left school, is huge. I had the choice of studying music, technology, and music for GCSEs and A-level, and I did performing arts, drama as well. And since leaving school, having kept in touch with my teachers and things, those subjects are quite often rolled into one now.
Oh, is that right?
So you don't really get quite the same thing. And
so they're already chipping away at it. But what about, if I may, that you'll be quite a rare example of someone who's pursuing a professional career in these disciplines. Most people who did drama at A-level or performing arts or music will not. So I suppose the question becomes, because for you, the non-vocational subjects turned out to be vocational, so you're a bit of an odd case study. What benefit do the non-vocational studies have for all the people in your class who haven't gone into professional musoing?
Well, I mean, above all, it teaches you to have a great deal of confidence in yourself. I mean, it's a thing where you're pushing creativity and you're pushing creative thinking and critical thinking. You're being analytical all the time. You have to learn how to make the right decisions for yourself, based on what your instinct is. So it's, if anything, it is just developing a real sense of confidence.
I like that idea. Intellectual confidence, not chutzpah, not Johnsonian confidence, but an actual kind of bottom, a depth to it, a substantive confidence.
Yeah. I mean, you can carry that into all sorts of jobs. I know people that have studied music to the degree to which I have, so up to postgraduate level, and they've ended up not doing that as a career. Recently, in that could have been because of the pandemic, and they've just decided, you know what, it is a really cutthroat industry, and it can be really tough. Whilst it is really rewarding, some people just think I'd like a safer option, and the skills they acquire, just through being someone who has to sort of, I guess you're in charge of your own destiny, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. I like that. And also that the sense of not being a ladder, the sense of it being a kind of much broader palette. There's the word I want. It's a palette, isn't it? And if you're doing computing and business studies, then it just feels a bit black and white. Whereas if you're doing languages and creative arts and music, then it just feels that you've got a lot more colour on your palette. I know it depends what you want to paint, but it does feel like you've got a broader palette. I mean, I don't want anyone to feel that I'm having a swing at them. If you loved maths and computer studies and business studies and all of that, it's not a question of one to the exclusion of the other. It's a question about whether or not one is being squeezed out, regrettably squeezed out. And I think when politicians actually explicitly talk about devaluing non-vocational subjects that cannot be immediately commoditized, it won't be their children who aren't studying art and music. It'll be your children. That's the thing that worries me. Just looking to create, we should be training up a workforce, not faffing about with inner lives and imagination. Leave that for the birds. 24 after 12 is the time. Alex is in Warmington in Northamptonshire. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hello, thank you very much for having me in.
You're very welcome.
I'm a languages teacher.
Let me guess, Spanish.
And this breaks my heart. Of course, I'm completely biased, but I think there is a hidden agenda here. And it's not just because of the politics of Brexit and everybody speaks English. When I say to my students, yes, everybody speaks English, but they might speak English as a second language, as a third language. Yes. And those that only speak English as a first language, I always believe that they are in a huge disadvantage, because you will have a person applying for the same job as you, but if that person can speak other languages, they will be better prepared for that job, and they might not need to use their language or that.
No, of course they will.
It's been scientifically proven that when you learn a language, it improves your memory. It gives you more mental flexibility and creativity. Yes. It improves your brain function, and even it has been proven that it can delay dementia and other diseases of brain.
Yes,
it's about promoting all the cognitive benefits, and not just languages. How about the arts? How about music? How about...
I thought you said sandwiches then, but you said languages, didn't you?
Sorry, it's my accent.
No, it's not. I thought it's not just about sandwiches. I thought, what's she talking about? Bocadillo would be there.
How about all those students, all those pupils that haven't got a brain designed to study maths, to study STEM subjects?
But do you think...
all the way to
listen.
GCSE level?
You are preaching to the converted with me, as I'm sure you appreciate. But do you think there is a deliberate decline? I mean, do you think, or is it's not just because computing and business studies are just more and more available? When I was a kid, you didn't really have that choice. So I did Spanish at GCSE. Do you think...
You have a good accent.
Yeah, but I only know about 48 words, Alex, unfortunately.
Never too late.
Well, that's true. Actually, that's very true. Although it does get harder and harder and harder. So do you think there is some sort of... deliberate move here? Students are being steered away from modern languages.
Yeah.
By whom?
But not just from modern languages.
No, but from all the creative why? Who's doing it and why are they doing it?
Well, there's definitely a hidden agenda from the government, from people that have a lot of power, a lot of money.
I think so as well. It's weird though, isn't it? Because you can still train up a workforce that is bilingual.
Yeah, of course. And
it's money.
And the minute you train pupils and you have that tunnel vision in which everybody has to know STEM subjects and maths, it's very easy to manipulate people, because then everybody is going to think that way. Everybody is going to be either black or white. There's not going to be a grey area. There's not going to be questioning. There's not going to be, why is this being done? It's a very easy way to control the mass. I do believe it, and because science and maths is very factual, isn't it?
Yes,
you cannot argue with it. You get a result.
Well, you can, but not until postgraduate level. I don't think.
Yeah. But when you study subjects that require critical thinking, that require problem solving outside the box, you need creativity. You need to think very differently and not necessarily follow a process every single time.
You're so right.
When
you're more likely to be a bit of a dissenter, aren't you? You're more likely to question things and speak truth to power. Things don't have to be like this. The rich man doesn't have to be born in his castle. God didn't order their estate. I don't like this. I want something different. I want something... But if you're doing business studies, you're unlikely to think like that. Are you seeing a decline in the number of Because I bet you're a brilliant teacher, so you probably are. You're probably bucking the trend, are you? But or are you seeing a decline?
I was in the set, and I'll give you a really interesting.
Please, quickly though.
So last year, not so much this year, but last year, I probably had the best GCSE that I've had in my teaching career.
Fantastic.
They were the best class, not just in terms of their ability, but also the motivation, how fantastic they were. All of them got 8 and 9s in the Spanish GCSE.
Wow.
Out of a class of 25,
yeah,
only 6 went to do it in A-level. And the reason for that was, it was because all of them saw, and all of them have been told, that it was so much better for the future to do science, maths, or economics.
Right. I just don't think that's true, though.
You don't think it's true that they were told that?
No, I just don't think it will serve them better in life. I don't know where that comes from. I'm out of time, Alex. I'm out of time. The bell has gone, I'm afraid.
Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you. It's not true, though, is it? You do. I mean, what are these jobs where you would do science and? Very odd. That's it. She's nailed it. It's the relationship between education and job. It's not a kind of, like putting a triangle in a triangular hole. There's so much more to it than that. And yet this diminishment of diverse subject choices does seem to create an identikit, a one-size-fits-all. There, we got there in the end. And of course it doesn't. But it is in the interest of a certain political persuasion to create a population where one size really does fit all. 12:30 is the time. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines. It's 12:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. You are denigrating people who study STEM subjects, James. Do you really think that all the technological and scientific advances were created by people without imagination and not willing to challenge the status quo? Absolutely I do not. I categorically do not. And I did say, in fact, that when you get certainly to postgraduate level, then in science and in maths, you are living the life of imagination. You are challenging everything and questioning everything. So I don't mean to denigrate anybody. I thought I'd been at great pains not to, actually. I just wonder whether the status quo was pretty good during the periods that you're alluding to, as opposed to moving away from creative subjects and certainly languages. Do languages alongside. Also, this is quite a British disease, because if you're doing a baccalaureate, you can do both. I think you can do 6 subjects, can you? So you could do both. You could be doing some creative subject and a language subject and a vocational subject and computing. And I don't know. We shall see. Billy's in Ventnor on the Isle of Wight. That pops up. Did it pop up in the Mark Steele podcast? Does anyone listen to it yet?
Oh, you know what? You're absolutely right, James. It was on, I can't remember the name, but he did a live Radio 4 show.
No, he did. He went to Ventnor to do Mark Steele's In Town, and then I think he talked about. We only recorded it yesterday. It goes out today. He's this week's guest on Full Disclosure. That's why I've got Ventnor in my mind, isn't it?
Oh, okay. Wow, I didn't know that. I mean, I know we've spoken before, and you told me about. I think I called up on Mystery Hour. This was years ago, and you told me that your legs turned to jelly when you went on the the cliff lift where.
Oh, mate! Where the multicoloured rocks are.
Yes, yeah.
That chair, is it still there?
It is, yeah.
That chairlift it's not. I mean, anyway, I've already shared that anecdote last time you rang in. What did you ring in for this time?
No worries, James. I'm just equally as bad. So thank you for putting me back on track. I'm actually calling in. I hope I've sort of hit the nail on the head here as a computing teacher and also someone with a computing degree. So I'm quite keen to put my tuppence in the machine.
Good.
First of all, I don't think you're insulting STEM at all.
I'm not.
Just sort of responding to that texter.
Yes.
I think that what's happening really, and this is what I'm trying to set out, is one is cancelling out the other, and I think quite rightly, because there is a demand now, more so than there was 30 years ago for, I can only talk for my specialism, computing.
Of course there
I'll give you an example.
Yes.
The cybersecurity industry, that's just one strand of the computing industry itself. Employers, according to government statistics, 3 in 10 employers find it difficult to fill a role. And that's quite a staggering figure in itself, because 35% of, I think, 560,000 people that work in that industry. I'm not a mathematician, unfortunately. I'm a computing teacher.
Sure.
That's quite a big...
Do you know, this is such a brilliant point to make, is that, I mean, there may well be concerns behind the decline in the subjects we've been talking about so far, but the proliferation of opportunities in the fields that you're referring to is a very good reason why more people would and should be studying these subjects than they did previously.
Well, this is precisely it, James.
Yes.
And for quite a number of years now as well, when I was doing my training and now as well, I bang the drum particularly for getting girls into computing and also getting more representation from ethnic minorities into computing.
Yeah.
Because I talk to my class, and when
Don't let the Daily Mail know, mate. They'll cancel you.
Oh, goodness me, yeah. I mean, when I was training in Portsmouth as a training teacher over on the other side of the water,
yes.
I said on a number of occasions to my classes that if all of you went into the computer science industry in any way, shape or form, the computer science world would be so much better for it. And I'll give you a typical example, and this is why I would say that actually it is a good thing that we are filling these unoccupied roles that we need. I mean, for a start, if you look at what the Chinese state does and the Russian state does in terms of cyber attacks, if you look at the 2017 WannaCry virus attack that killed 8 people and I think cost a total of £90 million and caused all sorts of disruptions back in 2017 to GP surgeries. If you look at what these states are capable of doing, we do need a defence mechanism. And this
so there's opportunities galore then. So you'd be foolish not to at least consider it. And that would involve, in this case, not doing one of the subjects that we're discussing. What about the UK's position in this world? In this, are we strongly placed, or because I do think I'm not going to step off the baccalaureate bridge yet. It would surely be better for younger people to be doing 5 or 6 subjects than forcing them down to 3 when they're 16 years old. Where does the UK sit at the moment in terms of going into these professions? Do we know? Do we have any idea?
Yeah, so, I mean, in terms of, nationally in this country, the government statistics are that with a cybersecurity role, I mean, I think the actual overall figure is high, but in terms of roles that employers find difficult to fill, as I said, 35% of employers have said they find it really difficult to fill a direct cybersecurity role. But obviously there are, subcategories to that role as well. Now, an example of that can be applied as well, James, to the computing industry as a whole, because there's lots of, and this is where I would 100% agree with you and say that we should absolutely keep the baccalaureate, because what that does is that encourages the types of skills precisely that we need in computing and computer science. So typically in computer science, you'll have user experience, user design roles, and that's a predominantly creative focus.
That's another brilliant point. I'm glad you were listening today. Why aren't you in school? Is it half term?
It is, yeah. So no late detention to me.
No, I don't know. Of course, and that was the other point being made. I'm going to crack on, but only because there's so many people waiting to talk, Billy. That was a really important contribution, because it that's what I said, actually. It's great being modest. I should try more often. That's what I meant about not being able to draw upon my own school days experience, because they are now completely irrelevant to what's going on now. So all of those jobs didn't exist when I was a kid. What was it you said earlier? Someone said something earlier about the over 50s. What was it? Oh, there's a Tory MP who has told his friends who are over 50. Oh, this one really stopped me in my tracks. Where's the story? The Tory MP has told his friends who are over 50 that they should get jobs in pubs. Did you see this story? Here it is. The Cabinet Minister in charge of getting people back to work after the COVID pandemic has started to tell his friends to get jobs in pubs or restaurants. Mel Stride said that he would often challenge some of his friends in their 50s and 60s who had stopped working about getting a job. I don't believe him, for a start. I'm prepared to accept he might have some friends, but the idea that he keeps telling him to go and get jobs in pubs. But the producer said, have you seen this story about the politician telling all the over 50s that they should get jobs in pubs? And my initial reaction was this: they won't like that. And then there's a pause, there's a heartbeat, and I go, oh my God, I'm over 50. This is about people like me. And I just howled. at the scene. Oh, no! It's so bizarre to see yourself in those categories. But of course, because you're in that category, you have to recognise that you haven't got a flipping clue about what Billy was just describing. Unless you're a teacher. or a particularly involved parent. So there you go. Swings and roundabouts, isn't it? 12:42 is the time. The calibre of your callers, the quality of your callers is too high. I'd love to call in, but I could never compete. I'm a language teacher. Thank you for this discussion. I'm going to go out on a bit of a hobby horse at this point and suggest that you are a female language teacher, because men never seem to be troubled by such modesty. And of course, you're wrong. You would be a brilliant contributor to the programme. 12:43 is the time. Victoria's in Aldershot. Victoria, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James.
Hello.
Well, I'm actually going to turn 50 on Monday, and I'm a teacher and I'm a parent of 4 children.
This is astonishing. You basically, this entire radio show was designed for you today, or at least the last 5 minutes of it.
Yeah. So I trained as a languages teacher. I came back. I was living in France for 3 years with my kids, and I came back and trained as a languages teacher. But I kind of recognised that there wasn't much of a demand, so I teach business studies and financial studies in post sort of 16 to 19 age group. And I think there's lots of reasons why kids don't carry on with languages. I think they don't see the relevance, but also it's really hard. It's become very, very difficult. So my second child is taking a French A-level and is bilingual, but it's actually really demanding. So it's a very difficult way to get that qualification. When I took A-level French, I wrote essays in English about the books I read, but I have to write them in French now. It's pretty demanding. But I think that the other reason that we've seen a decline in creative subjects is this Progress 8 measure, which the schools kind of live or die by, which is based on these 8 academic subjects. And so when you've got a very tight budget as a secondary school and you're making a decision about where you allocate resources, you put it on the resources that is essential for your survival as a school, that doesn't trigger an offset inspection and all that horrible stuff. So I see that there's a lack of focus in creativity, in sports.
There's a lot going on, isn't there? Yeah, a lot going on.
That's what our kids need. I see so much mental health issues in post-16.
Yeah.
And we all know that sport and creativity and drama and music and art all are good for kids' mental health. So I think that that's part of the problem. But the sort of final thing I see, the final piece of the puzzle is they're quite scared. So my kids, my sixth formers, are quite scared about the future.
Yeah.
They know they're not going to be able to buy a house. They don't know what the future holds. They see this huge debt that they're going to carry from university. And they kind of are thinking, I need to do something that's going to get me a decent salary pretty quickly. Because it's hard to provide.
But that's an unreasonable. I mean, it's not, is it? If everyone ends up doing the same subject, then no one really benefits in the way that you describe. They're not good likely. I mean, what are the jobs that demand, apart from very sector-specific jobs? Most people never really get asked what their degree was, do they? Or their A-levels?
Well, no, maybe not.
Or am I being rarefied again? I'm probably being rarefied.
I don't know. I think it worries them.
Yeah, I'm sure it does worry them, but I'm not sure that jettisoning a creative subject or a language in favour of computing or business studies or something that they think is more vocational, I'm not sure it is actually that helpful. I think you're probably going to see something in years to come where juicy jobs are seeking graduates with humanities subjects because they want a different skill set from the ones that the more prescriptive and vocational subjects teach. Maybe.
Yeah, well, we want creativity because we want diversity of thought and we want complex problems to be solved because the world is full of these complex problems.
Yeah.
And I'm always saying that to my students, you have to be able to, be part of a diverse team of people who can deal with what the future holds for us. And that's and I agree with you, the creative subjects are important, but I think that
there's a lot of reasons why the pendulum is swinging towards the subject that you teach, and that is not a bad thing. I mean, some of what you've said is bad, the mental health toll and the fears of the future, but that's what I thought. That's why I genuinely thought this will be, in large part, a story of the changing world, but it's definitely got a distinct subtext of deliberate engineering and pushing people away from subjects that are more likely to engender critical thinking, but only some. Arts teach you empathy, one of my texters says. Again, I'd be careful of statements like that because a surfeit of empathy, plenty of empathy among people who haven't studied the arts. Victoria, thank you. I'm just going to read this quickly from Rachel in Southampton because it's really good. That's why, James. I did the baccalaureate in the UK in 2007. I chose music as a higher level subject with English and French, and then science, maths and psychology as my standard level. I was told I'd never be a scientist by my school. So if I'd been doing A-levels, I'd have done music, drama and English. But thanks to doing 6 subjects, I now have a Bachelor of Science, a Masters of Science and a PhD in Psychology and Medicine. I'm a lecturer for the Masters of Science for the MSc in Public Health, and I encourage students to use creativity within science. The problem with the baccalaureate, of course, in the current political climate in this country is it sounds a bit foreign. So there'll be plenty of people opposed to it solely on the grounds that it sounds a bit foreign. What we need to do is rename it the Gammon-aureate. It's advert time. Plug time, but my own product, full disclosure, my podcast series, rather good, lengthy interviews, around about an hour, with fascinating people ranging all sorts. I've done some brilliant ones lately as well. I mean, they're all good. I've never done one. I've done one I wasn't mad about. One day I might give a Mystery Hour board game. Look at that, just segueing from one plug into another. Shall I give a Mystery Hour board game to anyone who correctly guesses which one I wasn't very... Why not? Why would that be a bad idea? We'd keep it secret. I wouldn't announce it. I'd read the text like this. I'd go, no. Oh, yes, that's who it was. You've won a Mystery Hour board game. There's one in the whole canon of all the Mystery Hours. Mystery Hours? All the full disclosures. Still love the subject. Still love the person I was interviewing. I just didn't think the interview was much cop. Just one out of how many? Several million? Just one. Anyway, this week's is categorically not one. Not that one. It's a brilliant one with Mark Steele. Superb comedian, amazing raconteur, all-round good guy, and fellow adoptee. And it was on the subject of adoption that he embarked upon this truly staggering story, which is about what happened when he tracked down his biological father.
He was part of the Claremont set. He came over here in the late 50s. And, of course, bit by bit, you start piecing these things together, right? Left Egypt in about between 1957 and 59. Now, why was that? Of course he would leave Egypt at that point because after the war of the British, French and Israelis on Egypt, where we tried to bomb Egypt because we didn't like NASA nationalising the canal, then the Egyptian nationalistic movement took a very anti-Semitic turn. It had already had that. It was already a big element of it, but it then became really unpleasant for Jewish people in Cairo and so on. It had been an area where there was, as always with these things, when people go, it goes back centuries. Yeah. Not really. I mean, there'd been a huge Jewish quarter. People got on beautifully there and so on. But various sort of bodies and so on then started attacking Jewish quarters, and so Jewish people, by and large, left. And a lot of them came here. They went to Manchester. And then he was obviously from some money, went to a private school, went, in fact, to the same school that the royal family go, Gordon's.
Gordonston,
yeah. So, in fact, he became mates amongst other people with. Prince Andrew tried to print. This is so bonkers. He had a property at one point because he made a lot of money. He became a backgammon champion quite early on, and then he went to the Claremont set. This would have been just in the years after he fathered me without knowing. I'll come back to that in a second. But he then was part of the Claremont set because the Claremont Club was this gambling club that was opened about 1960-61 by a man called John Aspinall, because he took advantage of the change in the gambling laws that meant that these gambling clubs were now legal, and all manner of the wealthy sort of went there to be seen. And amongst them were these group of people, these sort of modern, what we would recognise very modern businessmen now, people who saw themselves as pirates. They often use that word. We are pirates. We are people who are not afraid to go out into the world and take. And that is where you get progress, when you get people who have got this drive. Like Francis Drake, he didn't bloody sit around pontificating, did he, about bloody rules like they have in the EU. He just went out and took things, and that, they saw themselves as pirates. And these people were people who of a certain age will know these names: James Goldsmith, Tiny Rowlands, David Sterling, who was the founder of the SAS, people of that nature. And one of them was Lord Lucan, who was a buffoon really, but he was a very rich man, and he lost his fortune playing backgammon. And then it occurred to me one day, who would have been the one person in that club? Because he was clearly a very good backgammon player, Lord Lucan. Who was the one person who would have been consistently better than him? My bloody dad.
Good Lord.
And in the start of his, in the introduction to his book, into the book Backgammon for Profit, there's a fascinating little section where he talks about the psychology of playing backgammon, and he mentions, because at the time it's written, he's obviously a big sports fan as I am, and he talks about tennis at the time. He says, like, Bjorn Borg or Jimmy Connors, they won't play the same way against someone else. If somebody's very defensive and timid, they'll play in a certain way. If somebody's over aggressive and maybe reckless, they'll play in a certain way. You've got to be the same, he says, with backgammon, and you've got to understand the psychology. And then he says, there's this bit where he says, if you're playing against someone who you consider a friend, don't take all their money off them in one night of playing backgammon. And I thought, that's quite a sweet thing, you know. And then he says, because then you will kill the goose that lays the golden egg. It is far better to take just a bit off them, and then they will keep coming back to play you, and in the long run you will take far more off them.
Wow.
And then it was about a year after that I thought, Lord Lucan, you've done him. You've done him, haven't you? You've gone this bloody aristocrat.
He's absolutely rinsed him.
You've rinsed him. I mean, I can't know this for certain,
of course.
It looks fairly. Why did Lord Lucan lost all his money in that club playing backgammon?
And who was the best backgammon player in the club?
And had that mentality.
Yeah, of course. That's the final piece of the jigsaw, isn't it? That little bit.
I think that I might be talking rubbish, but
no, it's clearly it's more than plausible. Amazing. That's only one story. What's brilliant about Mark is that he makes stuff up in interviews, but he hasn't done it with me. You must listen to the beginning of that one where he tells a story that has followed him around for decades. But the stuff that's true about his life is much more remarkable and fantastical than the stuff that he's made up in the past as a consequence of not thinking that his true answer would be very interesting. Just very quickly, everyone's trying to guess which was the full disclosure I wasn't very pleased with, and you're all wrong. I like this one. I don't know about the worst, James, but Kathy Burke, Terry Christian and Michael Heseltine are some of the best in a list that's very hard to pick a favourite from. Was it James's interview with Steve Coogan? I loved my interview. I'm going to go all insecure now. The Steve Coogan one was brilliant. It certainly wasn't Deborah Mead, and I can see why you think it might have been Piers Morgan, but it categorically wasn't him, Rob, in Cheshire. Stephen Flynn was a really good one and quite recent, and Brian May's one of my favourites. Why are you all suggesting stuff I really like? This is terrible. I wish I'd never done this. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player. You can rewind live radio or enjoy the whole show podcast. You'll find all of LBC's shows there, as well as Full disclosure. Listen to all of them. Try and decide which is the one I was least pleased with. The only one that I came out of thinking, oh, I don't know that was very good. And there is a mystery hour board game for whoever guesses correctly. But you can't just send me loads of text listing them all. Anyway, Rewind Live Radio, Global Player, download free, App Store, globalplayer.com. Lewis Goodall, back in for Tom Swarbrick at 4 o'clock today. And now, of course, in for Sheila Fogarty, it's Sangeeta Maiska. 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 Fogarty, it's Sangeeta